At that exit poll, and we find out, well, just what the British electorate have decided. After 6 weeks of campaigning, a snap election that felt like it lasted longer, more than 6 weeks, I think, for most of us. After 5 years in power, we're about to find out exactly what people have decided. Stay with us here at Talk for all of the news. Joining me in the studio for their instant reaction to the exit poll is Lord Hayward. Robert Hayward is a Tory peer and, of course, pollster. Different hats on, depending what we're talking about. Conservative commentator Benedict Spence, and also former Labour Party official Richard Power Said, getting their views on where we are. So in literally 30 seconds or so, we will find out what is going to happen when the last votes have been cast. Millions of votes, of course, cast in postal ballots before today. But we'll get to find out only in a matter of seconds what that decision will be. Will we see Rishi Sunak leaving Downing Street? Will we see a new Prime Minister in Downing Street? Well, the information is going to be with us any moment now. Stay tuned for the exit poll that is imminent in a matter of seconds. We'll bring it to you here at Talk. Well, what is that exit poll going to say? What is the result? Well, it is a Labour landslide. There's certainly no doubt about that. The exit poll has predicted 410 seats for Labour. That is a huge, huge number. That's not as high as some of the exit polls, the MRP polls have suggested. 131 seats for the Conservatives, 61 seats for the Liberal Democrats. That's on the upper side of what they would have been expecting. And also Reform, 13 seats. Even many in Reform were predicting far fewer than that. Also, some of the mega polls had predicted that. The Greens on 2 and the SNP down to, wait for it, just 10 seats. So let's go through that again. It is a Labour landslide. It is a Tory bloodbath. That is not overplaying it. That is not an exaggeration of what has happened, what the British people have said in their votes today. The British people have spoken and they've said goodbye Rishi Sunak, hello Keir Starmer. The question is, did they say hello Keir Starmer with much enthusiasm, or are they just too keen on shutting the door back on 14 years of Tory rule? Well, let's go through those figures again. 410 MPs for Labour. That is a huge majority for them. Conservatives, 131. That is an absolute collapse. The Liberal Democrats up to 61. Reform UK, 13. That would have been by far their best case scenario if that does play out. SNP on 10 and the Green Party on 2. That would give a majority for the Labour Party of 170. That is a huge, huge majority. Well, let's go first to Lord Hayward, who is a pollster, as well as being a Tory peer. Your instant reaction to that result, is it where you thought it would be? How aligned is it with the mega polls that we've been seeing?
It's not far out in terms of Labour and Conservatives. Conservatives, depending on which MRP poll you looked at, either it's well above the predictions or it's at or close to. The figure that most surprises me, and I think will surprise many people, is the suggestion of 13 Reform seats. I
don't think even many people in Reform were expecting
precisely
that sort of number. I've been hearing certainly in the single figures.
Absolutely, and I think therefore the question is, where have those 13 come from? As yet we don't know what seats are projected, but that is the one big surprise. The other big disappointment, if it does come out as that, is for the SNP at 10, because that's way below the worst expectations.
I mean, it is way
for the SNP,
it is,
which means the Labour Party will have done very well in Scotland indeed.
Indeed, and that will be crucial for their... Well, look, let's go straight to someone who's no doubt probably the most smiley person in the studio, although I imagine quite a lot of Reform supporters are rather smiley today as well, and that is Richard Power Said, a former Labour Party official. Talking to you just before the show, you were saying, you know, polls are looking good, but, you know, I think everyone remembers 92, and when John Major swept back into power, and, you know, Labour were just sort of, what the heck just happened? 410, majority of 170.
This is the majority that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party needed to defend our democracy, quite quite frankly.
Oh, come on.
I think British democracy has... No, I'm not saying necessarily at risk from the Conservatives, but I think at risk from such stagnation in terms of living standards. I think people have the right to expect a better life.
How does a Labour majority of that size, say Boris Johnson's majority of 80 in 2019, I've never understood people talk about a super majority this. What difference does it make? You can either push your legislation through or you can't.
Yeah, sure. And when you've got the question of, like, are you going to be able to push back against NIMBYism? Are you going to be able to push back against the fossil fuel giants? These are the things that Starmer needs to be able to do in order to get the growth, deliver that growth, which can deliver the living standard improvements.
So the difference between Britain changing, the change we've been promised under Keir Starmer is having a majority that big. What would have been a majority that was too small?
I mean, I hope that if we had a majority half that size, we'd still be able to do just as much.
Okay.
But the fact is that you can be more ambitious when you've got a stronger majority. You can also be more ambitious because you can be thinking about that second term, potentially.
OK.
Potentially.
Well, potentially, yes. Let's not count our chickens. We haven't even seen the results from this election.
No,
Benedict Spence, his face was a picture listening to you on that. Benedict Spence, you're a Conservative commentator. What is your reaction to this?
I mean, just to sort of pick up on what has just been said there, it's all very well the size of the majority in terms of the MP, but in the number of MPs. But we do need to wait and see what the actual breakdown of the size in the constituencies, whether or not they're marginals, whether or not they've turned some of those unexpectedly into safe seats. If you want to be able to get to grips with things like, especially NIMBYism, that's what you need. You need actually very large numbers in those constituencies. Otherwise, you'll find yourself in the same situation that the Conservatives found. If this is true for the Conservatives, 130, then this is a fantastic result, given quite how badly they've been doing. And I think that's staggering that we're even saying that.
Well,
frankly.
This is it. I mean, we've been talking, have we not, about Robert Hayward, absolute wipeout. I mean, there have been some predictions of the Tories down to sort of 50, 60 MPs. I always thought that was quite unlikely. There's been a bit of a sweepstake in the office. No money changing hands. None of us work in 10 Downing Street, so we wouldn't. And I have to say, I mean, my guesstimate was a bit below that, but my gut feeling was it would be above that, because we've got this phenomenon of many, many years of these shy Tory voters. But doesn't a lot of this play out, depending on what seat you're in, how the votes are distributed, and also what opposition you've got, because we've got these other players now. We've got the Lib Dems coming up very strongly against the Conservatives in the blue wall. We've got Labour taking the seats back in the red wall, and we've got this challenge from Reform where even if they're, I mean, best case scenario, getting 13 seats, be interesting to see if that does play out. Even if they get far less, one of the crucial roles Reform UK has played is to basically break the chance of the Tories winning many other seats by splitting the right-wing vote and Labour getting in by default.
That's in part true, but there's been growing evidence that in fact Labour voters have been voting Reform and Lib Dems as well. Yeah. So although the largest single block is likely to have come from potential Conservative voters, it's not right to say that all Reform voters come from the Conservative camp. A pretty high proportion will come from elsewhere. One of the things we haven't got as yet, and I think is important in this large majority, which I don't challenge, is the percentage share of each of the political parties.
And that's going to be very interesting.
Because I think the chances are that the Conservative and Labour combined percentage share will probably be the lowest in a century.
Yes, and that's something we've seen, people turning away from those main parties. Do we know the turnout yet? Because turnout is quite crucial. We've seen, turnout. Back in 2019, the turnout was 67.3%. That was down on 2017. There's been a big feeling that these voters who are Conservative, they don't want to vote for the Labour Party, they don't want to vote for Reform UK, they don't want to vote for the Lib Dems, but they don't want to turn out and vote for the Conservatives, so they were just going to sit on their hands and stay at home.
No, we won't. Exit polls don't measure turnout. They may measure the turnout in that particular.
And there are only about 130 seats they look at.
In that particular polling station. We won't know the turnout until all the constituencies have validated their figures. I think there's important things. There have been stories running all day about higher levels of turnout. They may be higher than expected. Whether they're high or not is another matter. But also, people have just been looking at queues. But people have, for the first time, had to produce voter ID,
which means, of course, there's more likely to be a queue.
Slowed the process down.
Yeah.
And also, people working from home can vote earlier than they would normally possibly.
Instead of on the way home from the office.
We won't know until late tomorrow.
Well, if you're just tuning in, 8 minutes past 10 o'clock on election night. Yeah, we had all morning not being allowed to talk about the election. Wow, it's election all the way, all night. That exit poll is out, came out on the dot of 10 as the polling stations closed. A majority of 170 for Labour, 410 Labour MPs is what that exit poll predicts. Conservatives on 131. A terrible night for them, a bloodbath for them, but interestingly, not as bad as it could have been, as Benedict say, extraordinary. Liberal Democrats up from, 12 they won in the 2019 election, up to 61. A great night for them. It turns out, wearing a wetsuit, falling off a paddleboard, good for votes. Who knew? Reform UK, an astonishing prediction for them of 13 seats. MRP polls, these mega polls, before Nigel Farage joined the fray, became the leader of the party, took over from Richard Tice and said he was announcing for Clacton. That's the result, I think, coming in at about 4 a.m. Quite a long time to wait for that one. They were being predicted 0 seats, and then at one point 1 seat, possibly Clacton. SNP, absolute collapse in the SNP vote, down to just 10 seats, as Robert says. Could well mean that Labour have done very well in Scotland. I can't see the Tories taking many seats in the SNP there. Greens on 2, so they will have doubled their seats. I'm assuming they're thinking gaining Bristol. Which of course would be bad news for Thanam Debonair.
It would be.
But she may well be, bizarrely, the only shadow cabinet member about to be cabinet member who loses her seat.
That's most likely on these figures. Interestingly enough, I've just had a text message from a very active and fairly senior Labour person saying these figures are crazy.
As in crazily bad or crazily good?
Crazy in that they think it's an overestimation. I don't. I think it's pretty close to what people are saying.
Very interesting. Benedict Spencer, are you surprised by these figures, particularly if talking about the Conservatives, and particularly also about Reform UK apparently taking 13 seats, according to this exit poll?
Conservatives, yes, I'm surprised. Reform, actually, no. I'm not so surprised. And this is simply because of personal experience and conversations I've had with a lot of people. The sheer number of people who I have spoken to who have told me beforehand that they were considering voting reform, from all walks of life, of all age groups, young people, old, Brexiteers, Remainers, former Labour, former Conservative, it really has struck me. And it's not simply because they find reform appealing necessarily. They're not necessarily taken in by Nigel Farage and what he offers. It is simple animosity and dejectedness with both parties. Everybody, many people are very fed up with what the Conservatives have offered them, but they simply are not convinced by Sir Keir Starmer. And I do actually think it might not end up being 13. It could be sort of 7, 8, 9. That's still a lot more than it was expected to be. We have to see and wait and see where those votes fall. But I could entirely understand how in certain constituencies where, there has been sort of generations of being let down by both major parties, you could see these people swinging to reform simply because out of fury.
That were Labour seats in the Red Wall. I mean, this was one of the big fears, wasn't it? Richard Powell-Syed, as a former Labour Party official, there were seats in the Red Wall that fell over Brexit and Corbyn back in 2009. I've never thought it was all about Boris Johnson's unique fluffy-haired appeal. It was more about the other two, who not wanting to vote for Corbyn and wanting to get Brexit done. A lot of those people feel, what about the levelling up? What about proper Brexit? And they feel they've been done by. And this is the thing. So people voting reform, but look, undoubtedly, vast number of people have voted Labour. Do you feel that this is a positive vote for Labour, or do you feel a lot of this is, as the polls have suggested, the focus groups have suggested, this is just we've had enough of the Tories, we're done with you, it's been 14 years, time to give the other bloke a try?
I think it's time to try a party that's offering stability, frankly. And I know it sounds incredibly boring, but after 14 years of stagnating wages and 6, 7 years of political chaos, actually, that's kind of what people want.
We didn't notice? Did anyone notice that in the last 2 years?
I must have made it up.
We've been on air since 2016. I can think of barely anything that's happened in that time.
It's been extremely uneventful, totally boring.
Tranquil.
Placid. I mean,
but you know what you were saying about the Red Wall seats, something that I think often gets forgotten about the political history of those constituencies is that actually the vote for Labour, I'm afraid to say, had been going down gradually majority in most of those seats, what, from 2001 onwards,
even before then.
Even before then.
Yes.
So actually, you're talking about a very long-term story of...
It was going to happen anyway.
So, well, it's less about that. It's more about saying that something incredibly dramatic had to happen to reverse it.
Yeah.
Because when you've got communities that are deindustrialising, and I'm afraid to say New Labour did loads of lovely things, but they didn't reverse that terrible trend in our workplace and in our economy. And when you've got, the constituencies, you've got lots of people who perhaps did manual jobs, but then they've perhaps bought their council house. Now they own hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of property and they're pensioners. Not very surprising. People like that stop voting Labour. So those are the kinds of changes that you saw culminating in that terrible loss of seats in 2019. Yeah. And I would say that what's happened now is people are saying, they're looking at Keir Starmer and saying, we don't know what's going to happen in the next few years. We're pretty worried about the global situation. We think that this guy can steer the ship, but it is lending votes. We know we're being lent the votes in the Labour Party, and people's quality of life has got to improve over the next 5 years.
The question is, of course, will it? There isn't any money to spend. Look, just a deputy, about to be, we expect now, and on the basis of this poll, Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, she's just been speaking, saying it would be an honour and privilege to serve as Deputy Prime Minister, but says she is not counting my chickens until all the results are declared. Prediction of 100. I mean, I need to point out, look, polls aren't always accurate. We've had some polling in the past that have been accurate. The last two, 2017, 2019, incredibly accurate. I mean, 2019 was only out by, I think, 3 seats. So let me get to some of the big beasts that we're going to be looking at their seats later over the night. Of course, Mike Graham and Ian Collins coming in from 1 o'clock and from 4. It does look likely on this exit poll that Rishi Sunak could keep his seat. I've always thought this is the worst case scenario for him because he wants to up sticks and head off to Canada. He's going to be stuck as an MP in Yorkshire. Love the place, Yorkshire, beautiful place, but he's going to be stuck there. But he's not going to be Prime Minister. Oliver Dowden, his deputy, likely to keep his seat. There were some question marks about that. James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, likely to keep his. Kemi Badenoch, of course, a key front runner, likely to be the favourite of many Tory party members to be the next Tory leader. It looks like also that Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, likely to keep her seat. However, too close to call. Penny Mordaunt, another possible Tory leadership contender. Grant Shapps, Johnny Mercer, Jeremy Hunt, all looking like they will fall. Shapps and Mercer to Labour. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, falling to the Liberal Democrats. I have to say, can we just have a little moment and a smile at the joy of Jeremy Hunt losing his seat? I'm sorry. As my regular audience will know, I hold no candle for this man. This is a man who would have kept us in lockdown forever. He really would have. I've got no time for him. But what do you make of that, Benedict? Look, the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, some of the big beasts look like they are safe, but we're still likely to get off our Portillo moment. Jeremy Hunt, Grant Shapps, could be Penny Mordaunt.
I mean, to be fair, the sheer turnover of Tories that they've sort of had to shoehorn into the cabinet at some stage did make it inevitable that there would be some big beasts or people who fancy themselves as big beasts who would lose it. It's interesting though. 130 rather than the 60 scenario opens up the field. Perhaps we're getting slightly ahead of ourselves, but it does open up the field in terms of who might put their name forward as a candidate to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, because that's going to be the next thing that we do look to talk about. Penny Mordaunt, of course, that's the big one that everybody's looking about because she certainly rates herself. I don't know how much other people do, but she certainly rates herself.
She carries a sword very well.
She does, and that's what you want in times of crisis. I've
always said carrying a sword is an absolute requirement to being a good Prime Minister. She also has fabulous hair. I say this all the time, but I've got a lot of time for Penny. I mean, on the fact she thinks that trans women are women, but I mean, she has actually said that. But I genuinely, I just think I don't know why people think those are credentials for being PM.
I don't know, but there we are. Although apparently the people of Portsmouth do not necessarily agree with that, which is it's nice to see that they've seen through the facade. But we wait and see. I mean, whether or not everybody's.
Robert Hayward's getting very upset here. No, I like Penny Mordaunt. I'm just saying that when people say, "Oh, she's so obviously," if only Penny Mordaunt had been leading the Tories, this wouldn't have happened. This is absolute nonsense.
They said the same thing about Sunak, didn't they? And look what happened. It was magnificent, wasn't it?
It's already descended into chaos, everybody. This is what you're here for.
It's vibes politics. Sorry.
Robert, go
ahead. Go ahead.
No, Richard, carry on.
It's vibes politics. She's kind of nice. She sort of seems like the sort of person who might have led the Conservative
delivers well
Party.
in the dispatch box.
Yeah, but that's not like how you run an effective political operation. Okay. I mean, she did dress up like a sort of dystopian autocrat for the coronation.
She looks fab. fabulous.
She did. That wasn't a criticism.
She was sat next to the king. She looked like the autocrat. Come on.
You know what I think is what's really going to be really interesting is how close that result for Kemi Badenoch is, right? Because remember, if it's really close, then the postal votes that have got lost in that constituency might result in a by-election, and then she can't run to the leadership.
That is something we do want to come to. But Robert, come on, you want to put a defence in a penny order? Go on.
I was just staggered by the vindictiveness that you came out with for Jeremy Hunt and came out with in relation to Penny.
Can I just say, I was editing myself for Jeremy Hunt.
There's a lot of PTSD in this
a few hours.
Jeremy Hunt praised the Chinese government for locking people up in their home, physically locking them up. Well, that's what they've been doing in China. Oh, wouldn't that be a good idea? Come on.
I think it is important here to say, and the question of postal votes is valid if there is a contest.
And particularly in Scotland, because, of course, people have got school holidays already started in Scotland long before they do in England. People come back from their holes in mid-August. And so people got postal votes because they were going to be away. So it's all very well saying, well, you can go to the polling station on the day. Well, you can't if you're already in Spain.
That issue in Scotland was known, and as far as I'm aware, the distribution of postal votes has not hit a problem in Scotland unless there are parts that I've not noticed. The key issue in relation to one or two constituencies, including Kemi's, is that there does appear to have been a serious problem, and I've had a report or two from other places where postal votes have just not arrived.
Yeah.
And I'm a great fan of returning officers. They face a burden which politicians of all persuasions have put on them more and more. We've created more elected positions, all sorts of burdens. And I have, on a number of occasions, warned that some form of breakdown would take place in our electoral system. If it's only one or two constituencies, I shall be relieved.
I'm wondering how much having to have photo ID will impact. I had a friend who got in touch this morning saying, help, I've just got married, I sent off my passport and my driving licence to get my name changed, and they haven't come back in time. I pointed out Electoral Commission on the website saying you could use an old photo ID. So a passport that's out of date is still proper photo ID, but there's no doubt there are going to be some issues. There are going to be some people who've been turned away. And I have to say, I'm a big fan of photo ID for people to vote. I find it extraordinary that I could have got a Blockbuster, I'm that old, I could have got a Blockbuster, a rental car, and needed more ID for that than I do to vote in this country. It's completely normal in most countries. It's been the norm in Northern Ireland for years, hasn't been an issue. We used it in the local elections. However, so much more ID has been allowed for older people than for younger people. If once you're a pensioner, basically any piece of paper you have is your ID. But for instance, a young person's rail card, for which you need to give a formal ID to get that, that's not allowed. Benedict, do you think that might end up being an issue, or is it not an issue when you're looking at a majority of 170?
I think it's going to be that sort of thing where it perhaps would have impacted voters who are more likely to vote Labour than Conservative, and if the exit polls are to be believed, then no, that's not really a major thing. In some circumstances, there might have been a few people who ran into difficulties. I doubt that it's on a scale large enough to have affected many seats, to be honest.
Can I say that although Angela Rayner is not counting her chickens yet, she says, although she would hopefully, she would hope to be Deputy Prime Minister of this country by tomorrow morning. Sir Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrat leader, is absolutely counting his chickens. They've already all hatched. He's counted them. He's named them all and everything.
Is he on a bungee jump?
He's probably on a bungee.
He's filming it.
He's in a canoe. I don't know what. He's in a canoe on a bungee jump into water, holding a paddleboard, at this moment in time.
The chickens are mustering.
Sir Ed Davey has said that he was humbled by the exit poll. Everyone's got to stop sniggering at the back now, which he says has shown the Liberal Democrats on course for its best results for a century. He said the Liberal Democrats, thanks to a positive campaign with health and care at its heart, every Lib Dem MP will be a strong local champion for their community, standing up for the NHS and care. Whether you voted for us or not, we will work day in and day out and we will not let you down. That's what he has to say. You're not happy with that, are you, Richard Bowser?
I mean, look, it was absolutely lovely hearing Ed Davey's personal stories about his experience as a carer. I think a lot of people were very moved by that. It was very meaningful. It was not why people voted Lib Dem. I'm sorry. They voted Lib Dem because they noticed that the Lib Dems were there, and they noticed that the Lib Dems were there because there was a guy on a bungee rope. And you know what? kudos to him for some very effective campaigning.
But
he did what he needed to do, which was
if the end of this election campaign means I don't have to see Ed Davey in a wetsuit ever again, then hurrah, is all I can say.
I mean, they're going to try it again in 2.5 years.
Stop doing it, Ed. So 10:23, just to reiterate, before we go to a break, just to go, if you are just tuning in, where have you been the last 20 minutes or so? We do have that exit poll from 10 o'clock. Labour have a majority predicted of 170, 410 MPs for the Labour Party, 131 Conservative MPs, Lib Dems predicted to get 61, Reform, staggering number, 13 MPs. Not even their leadership were predicting that privately today, I can assure you. SNP down to 10, 2 Greens and various other parties getting 23. I wonder if that includes George Galloway. We'll get his result in the early hours of this morning. We're going to go to a quick break, and then I'm going to read you about what's been going on with the Dissolution honours. Quite a few big names in there getting honours. We'll come to that in a few moments. More on the exit poll, more on what we've got to expect for the rest of the evening. Do stay tuned. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, good evening to you. This is Talk with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, the home of common sense. We are here with the exit poll. That's all we've got so far. It'll be at least another hour before we actually get a proper election result. And we'll keep being told the only poll that matters is the one where people actually cast their votes. Well, the exit poll is compiled in about 130 different constituencies around the country, with people actually replicating the vote that they just done at a polling station, and then a secret ballot again, putting it into a ballot box, and then those votes are counted up. Well, if you are just tuning in, it has predicted a massive majority for the Labour Party, 170. Bearing in mind, though, lower than Tony Blair achieved in 1997 with 179, but a Labour majority of 170. It is undoubtedly a landslide Labour victory, and it is a bloodbath for the Conservatives, down to just 131 seats. I mean, that's an extraordinary number down, bearing in mind Boris Johnson won 365 at the last general election. The Labour Party have more than doubled their seats from 202 up to 410. The Liberal Democrats up from 12 seats that they won in 2019 up to 61. Reform UK, of course, not even a party back then. It was the Brexit Party, stood down a lot of candidates in 2019. Reform Party predicted their best result predicted from any of the polls that we saw ahead of the election in the exit poll. 13 MPs, SNP down to 10, and the Green Party on 2, so doubling their seats. Let's get to some of the dissolution honours, though, just very briefly. Get my guest reaction to this. Dissolution honours were announced just before 10 o'clock. Former Prime Minister Theresa May will become Lady May. She has got a peerage. I think would be the norm for a former Prime Minister, no matter how bad they were. Craig McKinley, of course, known as the Bionic MP, a wonderful friend of this show, lost his hands and his feet due to sepsis, absolute tragedy. He, Liam Booth-Smith, the Chief of Staff to Rishi Sunak, and Dr Hilary Cass, of course, author of the Cass Review, have also all been nominated for peerages. Others include Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the Backbench 1922 Committee, a man we've heard a lot about in recent years. The former Energy Secretary, Alec Sharma. This will be for I think chairing COP, being president of COP. Basically, the deal is if you're going to talk a load of nonsense on green stuff for months on end, at least you get a peerage out of it. Seems like a good deal to me. And former Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, Deb Eleanor Lang, also. Keir Starmer has put forward a total of 8 nominees in the dissolution honours, including Dame Margaret Beckett and Harriet Harman, both, of course, former deputy leaders of the Labour Party. Also, another announcement, Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, who, according to the exit poll, should keep his seat, has also been knighted. And former Deputy Prime Minister Therese Coffey has been made a Dame. They've been given top honours alongside Ben Wallace, the former Defence Secretary, former Chief Whip Julian Smith, both made a Knight Commanders of the Order of the Bath. Order of the Bath. There we are then. As well as Scottish Secretary has been made Knight of the Order of the British Empire. Yeah, the honours are flying. Come to you, Benedict, on this. Still with me, Benedict Spence, Conservative commentator, Labour Party official, former, I should say, Richard Power Said and Lord Robert Hayward, a Tory peer and pollster, all with me for the duration. Very brave souls here. Those honours, I'm not a fan of honours generally, I have to say. As she said, with Lord Hayward sitting next to her. Luckily, he's far enough away he can't reach me. I'm not, but there are people who think, well, if they're going to have honours, then, let's have the likes of, Claire Fox in and people like that. Yeah. What do you make of it? Is this just kind of honours for, if you've been a politician at a certain level, then,
there is a bit of that, but actually two that do stand out. I think Craig McKinley has been, a really important voice in the House of Commons, and that's aside from his very tragic and, subsequently very fortunate personal story. Actually, I think that there's no more deserving member of the House of Commons, actually, than him. I also think that Dr Hilary Cass's report is a very important moment, actually, in the trajectory of this country. So I'm very happy to hear it, that she's been rewarded.
Some of those, yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm looking ahead to what we're going to see this evening of Robert Hayward, and there are some MPs who, and candidates, regardless of my political views or their political views, who I just think I want them to be in the House of Commons because I think they're good people. I think they're people who are independent-minded. I was very upset to hear Craig McKinney came back at the election was called and he's decided to stand down. There's some others. We need free-thinking, independent-minded people rather than just sheep, don't we, in the House of Commons, particularly when you've got a majority this big?
Tragically, under ordinary circumstances, what happens is good MPs and bad MPs lose because there's broadly a national swing. We may find on this occasion that because there's been a lot of people who are willing to swing in terms of one party or another, that this may be the exception on this occasion, that people have voted for incumbents who have got a good reputation. And I really hope that is the case, which is why I'm desperately trying to look at the projections for some constituencies.
For some specific
But I am going to make a very personal comment. Yep. Craig McKinley, his wife, I sat with his wife while Craig was in the Chamber of the Commons. They actually allowed, quite abnormally, peers are separated from guests. The door messengers let me sit alongside her because I've been with her on and off through all sorts of troubles.
It's just been absolutely awful.
I sent him a message saying, I want to introduce
Craig,
him.
we love you. Lord McKinley, we love you. OK, I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and I want to discuss what this huge majority of 170 means in terms of what Labour can do, which perhaps they couldn't perhaps do before, but also what happens now for the Conservatives. We've heard about some of the seats they might win, they might lose in terms of the big beast, but what does that mean for the direction of the Conservative Party over the next few years, and how quickly can they regroup and get back to power, if ever? I'd love to hear from you as well. If you want to get in touch, do get in touch. Your reaction to the exit poll, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can also text us on 87222 and get in touch on X at talkTV. Love to hear all of your thoughts on that. This, of course, is where the nation comes to talk. We are Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:36 is the time, 36 minutes after we got that exit poll. If you just tuned in, it is predicting a 170-seat majority for the Labour Party, 410 seats for Keir Starmer. Conservatives getting just 131. I say for Rishi Sunak, but I don't think he's going to be in the job for many more hours. Liberal Democrats, a whopping big increase for them, up to 61. Reform, again, an incredible number, if this is true, of 13 seats for the start-up party, really. SNP absolutely down to 10. Green Party getting 2. We've still got in the studio former Labour Party official Richard Power-Said and Conservative commentator Benedict Spence. Let's also welcome Tim Montgomery. He's founder of Conservative Hope, former Number 10 advisor. We've spoken to you so many times over the last few years about where things have gone right, where things have gone wrong. What went wrong?
How long have we got, Julia?
Right, well, we're on till 1, so if you just keep talking and we'll...
Well, look, I know this sounds ridiculous, what I'm about to say, because this is an historic defeat for the party I support, but I'm mightily relieved. I thought it was going to be a lot worse. I really did. A lot of people...
We were talking about people, you know, having 50 or 60 seats, Conservatives.
No, I was sort of worrying, you know, a couple of hours ago. I was like, I was melting down almost. You know, I was worried whether we'd even be the opposition.
In the sweepstake we had in the office beforehand, what number did you give for the Conservatives? 88. So you're celebrating. You're popping the champagne.
I'm relieved. But what I'm hearing from some psephologists is they think a lot of these seats are in the attributed to the Conservatives in this exit poll by quite thin margins. So normally these exit polls are pretty accurate. But I think, you know, the night is young.
The Lib Dem resurgence and the arrival of Reform UK have kind of stirred things up, haven't they?
Oh, completely. Well, that was the real Tory problem. Well, many Tory problems, but it's hard when you're losing support to your right, essentially, to reform, to your left, and to the Greens. The Greens, I think, have taken... I was quite surprised. People in my own family, I told them why they shouldn't vote Labour. I told them why they shouldn't vote Lib Dem. I forgot to mention the Greens, and they voted Green, because I think people have an idea that they're just nice and about the environment.
They really aren't nice.
But they really
it's the most authoritarian party on the planet.
So I've got some work to do on my family, Julia, after this is all over.
Well, we all do with our families. We all do. I mean, where specifically did it go wrong? A lot of it is going to be blamed on, you know, Nadine Dorries is sitting there right now. I can tell you right now, going, if only Boris, if only we'd kept Boris, we'd have had 170. I mean, she would be genuine. I've always said, find someone who loves you like Nadine loves Boris. That will make you happy. But you know, is it because they ousted Boris, the chaos of Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak? Is it because they again, the left of the party say they lurched to the right, and the right of the party says, well, you were too wishy-washy, lefty, Lib Demi. What's your thesis? You're very in touch with Conservative Party members, Conservative Party voters, having founded Conservative Home. It's the grassroots membership website.
Well, this is the big thing I would say now to all my fellow Conservatives. Don't just go back to what your natural instinct is. You know, Borisites blaming the downfall of Boris. Trussites blaming Rishi Sunak for not doing the right thing. Almost every single Conservative has to own this defeat. All of us, in different ways, have made contributions to
this.
But
hold on a minute, what about some of the Conservatives who've been saying that you're crazy to have another lockdown, you're crazy to go for net zero, you're crazy to not do anything about the culture wars and trans women and women nonsense that we're going to be inundated with for the next 5 years. You failed to do any of that. You talked a good game, but actually you've basically had Labour Party policies. Those MPs... And some of them are going to lose their seats tonight. I don't think they are to blame. I think they've been trying to save the party from itself.
Well, look, I agree with nearly all of those policy positions you've just set out. But that explains why we lost a lot of voters to reform. It doesn't explain why we also lost a lot of voters to staying at home, to the Lib Dems or Labour. There was a lot of voters lost everywhere. And look, we need a comprehensive shakeout of the Conservative Party. Just us leaning back to what we naturally wanted and thought the problem is a dangerous way, because the Conservative Party can't just be a party of the right. It has to be a party that stretches from the centre to the right.
Let's put this to Labour's person, Richard Power Said. Looking at this from the outside, what do you think the Conservatives did so wrong?
So I think that the idea that you had this kind of wishy-washy woke Sunak government from the outside looks pretty silly, folks. Like, you had a Prime Minister who made jokes about trans people.
Oh, for goodness sake.
You had a Prime Minister who
was mocking Keir Starmer.
Who mocked trans people when the mother of a murdered girl was in the Commons there. You have a Prime Minister...
This was the moment that lost them.
This was it. Until then, everything was going fine.
I'm saying that this is a sign of how not illiberal this government has been.
So the Tory party was too right-wing?
No, I think actually that the Tory party tried to be too many different things to too many different people.
Too broad a church. Can I come back to Benedict Spence on this, though, as well? Political parties are very broad churches. And, you know, Labour Party, certainly over the last few years. Benedict Spence, do you think it's too broad and actually there isn't space for, you know... the Lib Demis and the Reformites effectively in different wings of the party?
I don't think it's necessarily too broad. I do think that there is a lack of maturity from a lot of people within the party as to what it is that a party is supposed to be. And I think Labour went through its own period of that very recently, where one wing basically went, well, we're happy to lose as long as the other side isn't in charge of the party. I think that you can get that slightly immature tendency. I think what has actually gone wrong is that they've not been very good at governing. Actually, It's been 14 years of basic functions of the state slowly breaking down. And I think that things like lockdown in particular shone a light on that when the economy went whoa, and it didn't come back, and then suddenly everything started breaking down. People realised, oh, hang on, the prison system isn't working, the education system isn't working. That's what did fall.
It's a question I've actually asked quite a few cabinet ministers and ministers over the last year or so. Like, tell me a public service that works, and there's this sort of umming and ahhing, and then let me just get, before we come back to you, and I know you all want to come in, so I invited them in because they've got something to say, even though we haven't got a single result yet. It's an interesting show, this, isn't it? No, but it is fascinating because you gear up the election, all you've got is an exit poll, and this is interesting because the Conservative Work and Pensions Secretary until tomorrow, Mel Stride has said, oh, by the I'm just calling it as it is.
Just a machine
with a big smile on
I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't think Keir Starmer is going to appoint Mel Stride as the Work and Pensions Secretary. Am I right? Anyway, he's the man. He went out virtually every other media round. He was considered to be sort of somebody who was safe pair of hands, who wouldn't completely mess it up. He has said this is a very difficult moment for the Conservative Party, in understatement. He says he's very sorry that the exit poll is projected. The number of his colleagues will lose their seats. On keeping his own seat, he says, we will have to wait and see. An official spokesman for the Conservative Party says this is a projection, not a result, so it's important we wait to see the actual results come in. But if these results are correct, it is clear that Starmer and Angela Rayner will be in Downing Street tomorrow. That means your taxes... Oh, here we go. That means your taxes will rise and our country will be less secure. I want to come back to that quote in a moment, but Labour peer Lord Mandelson... Could you keep me hissing down, please, at the back? He has said an electoral meteor has now struck planet Earth after exit polls showing Labour on track to win a huge landslide victory. So we've got a load of reactions there. Tim Montgomery, this line from the Tory spokesman, your taxes are going to rise, our country will be less secure. This sort of campaign based on fear. So there was a snap election, let's wrong foot reform UK, Nigel Farage, they're not ready yet. We'll bring this surprise election, things are only going to get worse rather than better. It's fear. Yeah, we've been rubbish, but that lot will be even worse, and your taxes will go up, and, Putin will invade. Yeah. I mean, that didn't play very well with the electorate, it seems.
No, it didn't. And, joining that question you just posed to me, Julia, with the discussion we were having just a moment ago, I think fundamentally the Tory problem, yes, it may have sounded right-wing recently, but people looked at actually what it was doing on immigration or things, and it wasn't, as Benedict said, it wasn't competent, it wasn't serious.
Should we all have a little moment remembering immigration, net immigration, in the tens of thousands? what was last year's? 750,000?
Yeah, huge. And that is where the Conservative Party needs to go in its recovery now. It needs to become the adult party again, the serious party. We've never really been seen as the party that most people think is the nice party, but we were turned to...
The nasty party.
Yeah, sometimes. But we were always seen as the grown-ups in the room. If you wanted something fixed, the Conservatives would do it. It's going to be hard to do that in opposition. Our rebuilding will have to take place in local government, primarily, but that's where we need to go. Yes, we've got to get the policies right, but most of all, we've got to get a reputation again as grown-ups, and our campaign, our period in government, didn't help with that reputation.
I'm wondering whether a Tory leadership contest is going to help with that. Richard Power-Said?
Just thinking back to the quote from Mel Stride there, or whoever it was.
All right, harsh. You're telling me I'm being harsh.
I was worried it might have been a spokesperson or something. Look, the taxes are going up because Rishi Sunak paid, what was it, like £10 million, 10 million people's salaries during lockdown. Taxes are going up because Liz Truss, the laissez-faire queen, decided to control energy prices after Putin's war on Ukraine.
Wait a minute. Labour's party supported both of those things.
Totally. But that is why taxes are going up. It's just, So
it's not the Tories' fault?
It is the Tories' fault, because if spending goes high, then taxes have to go high. But hold on a minute.
The Labour Party supported furlough. In fact, you called for more lockdowns, sooner, longer, deeper and more furlough money. You asked for more help for people.
Everyone supported those policies, and so everyone has to...
Not everyone. I can remember not everyone.
You can't blame the Labour Party for sort of ushering them towards
but also when everyone was demanding that Liz Truss dealt with the energy crisis and subsidised.
I supported it.
She did come up with a particularly
expensive
version.
So it's not the Tories' fault that their taxes are going up.
My point is that you can't complain about taxes going up, as Mel Stride did, when you were responsible for the policies that require the spending. Can I add just a little other thing? Yes. So, we're talking about them becoming the sensible party. Look, since 1987, the Tory party has only won one election with a convincing majority. It's when they weren't a laissez-faire party, but laissez-faire economics is the thing that brings you together, right? This is your big problem. You only win when you were saying you were going to level up, but that, you don't believe in it.
Very, very interesting. Tim Montgomery, come back on that.
Well, I'm afraid that was one of the big consequences of Boris leaving. Neither Liz Truss nor Rishi Sunak really did believe in levelling up. And the reason we won those red wall seats 5 years ago, seems a million years ago, was because we made promises to people in the north about what they expected after Brexit. The vote for Brexit was primarily a protest about an economic order that wasn't working. The Conservative failure to address that is probably the biggest failure.
I'm going to ask my other two guests about this because we were here throughout the show, but Tim Montgomery, while I've got you here, Tory leadership contest inevitably coming sooner or later. You've argued actually it should be later. We should have an interim leader, I know, but who will it be?
Well, if we've got this controversy about postal ballots in Kemi Badenoch's constituency, which I won't go into, but I think she will win if she clearly wins.
If Kemi Badenoch, her husband told me it's pronounced Badenoch. I'm going with Badenoch. I will try and remember that. But yeah, if she does win her seat, she is the next Tory leader.
Probably, yes, probably. Not my choice. I'm a Tom Tugendhat.
Tom Tugendhat, right? Very interesting. Well, again, we have to see who gets their seats. Tim Montgomery, absolute pleasure to have your company. Founder of Conservative Home, former Number 10 advisor. Thank you very much. More from Richard and Benedict coming up. Plenty more besides. Do stay tuned. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, good evening. It's 10:51. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you very much for joining me. If you have just tuned in, where have you been the last 51 minutes? We've got that exit poll from 10 o'clock sharp when the polling booths closed. Labour are on track for a massive 170 majority, although less, of course, than Tony Blair won in 97 with 179. But 410 Labour MPs is what's being predicted, 131 Conservative MPs. A lot worse than some were saying, a lot better than others were saying. Lib Dems up to 61. Reform UK on a very surprising 13-seat projection. SNP down to 10. That's from 43 last time round. And the Greens up from 1 to 2. So a lot of change happening, a lot moving on. I'm delighted to say joining me in the studio still is Richard Power-Said, former Labour Party official, Benedict Spence, Conservative commentator, and now we're joined by talk presenter and political anorak extraordinaire, I think you mean that, Peter Caldwell. Hello.
Hello.
What do you make of it all?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? The lead for Labour, not as much as some people predicted. Reform UK have done really well. Absolute, basically wipeout for the Conservative Party. All sorts of Conservative leadership contenders, including Penny Mordaunt, who look set not to keep their seats. Scotland, fascinating as well, Julia.
Well, where do we think all those seats have gone?
Labour, basically.
So the
SNP down from 43 to 10. That is a catastrophic result for them. And, Reform UK going from 0 to 13. It's a real shift.
On the Reform UK vote, and although it's a minor party, but Nigel Farage is he's came back as leader of the party, even though a day after he said he wasn't going to stand, he stood in Clacton. He's predicted certainly to win that seat by a pretty healthy majority as well. 8th attempt at becoming an MP. But they were expecting realistically in the sort of mid to low single figures.
Yes,
realistically. So this is a lot better. This is what one of the MRP mega polls suggested. I think they're quite wary about whether this is actually going to happen or not. But what difference does that make when you've got a Labour majority of 170?
Probably not a huge difference, but what it does give Reform UK is something they haven't had previously, which is seats in Westminster. I've just looked at the exit poll here, and the likely Reform gain in Clacton, Nigel Farage's constituency in which he stood, is 99% plus. So I think we can fairly accurately say that Nigel Farage will be an MP. It'll be interesting, the 12 others, because there'll be some who have been senior figures in Reform UK. There'll be others who perhaps haven't and are maybe unknown quantities. That'll be an interesting thing as well, and perhaps a challenge for Nigel Farage, but it will give him even more of a megaphone. It'll give him parliamentary legitimacy that he has never had previously, and it will mean that Reform UK can do things and say things and have money and have staff and people around them in a way that they've never had before in the UK parliamentary system anyway. That
will make a big difference. And again, Liberal Democrats will be absolutely thrilled with their role. I think one of the mega polls, though, Richard Power-Said, suggested that the Lib Dems could even become the second largest party, the official opposition, with those 6 questions at the dispatch box. I mean, that wasn't going to happen, but they'll be thrilled to know they're going to get those 2 questions, PMQs, which the SNP has had for quite some time.
Yes, indeed. I actually want to go back, though, to Reform and its impact for Labour, actually, because I think it's going to be really significant. If the Tories had done a bit worse than this, then you would have seen enormous pressure on future Tory leaders to form some sort of informal alliance with Reform. I think the Tories are just about safe from that, given the number of seats they've got, maybe. But Labour, is going to be really feeling Reform breathing down their necks. We are going to see, it easily could be 100 seats where Reform is in second place to Labour. And, we're seeing places like Barnsley North and South probably going Reform. I'm afraid to say Ashfield is going to
well, that was probably always going to happen with Lee Anderson there.
Yeah. That is going to create a really big problem within the Labour Party, within the Parliamentary Labour Party, because you are going to have lots of people saying, I've got Reform breathing down my neck, I want us to be pushing for the kinds of policies that might attract potential Reform voters. Those are completely anathema to the rest of the Parliamentary Labour Party. The only way you deal with that is by helping people with their living standards, going down the middle. Yeah,
remember that levelling up thing? We heard so much about that at one point, didn't we? Benedict Spence. I'm going to come back to Peter, because I'm going to get his analysis as well. But in terms of what the Tories need to do now. Look, it's a bloodbath for the Tories on 131 seats. Bearing in mind in 2019 Boris Johnson won 365. I mean, it is an absolute bloodbath, and a lot of MPs are going to be very angry, and they're going to be speaking rather publicly, I imagine, about quite how angry they are and what went wrong. But the analysis, as we've been saying the last hour, may be different from different people. What do you think went wrong, and what do the Conservatives need to do now?
I think, to go back to what Tim Montgomery was saying, it's about actually appearing maturing like a mature party that understands what its direction is and forming a credible opposition. You know, the worst thing that could possibly happen is if the Conservatives decide, you know what the country really wants? It's more of our infighting, and that's what we're going to subject people to. All the while Nigel Farage then picks up momentum in the House of Commons and trains the guns on Labour, taking away, you know, potential support that the Tories need to be doing, and shoring up the idea that he is potentially an alternative right-wing voice. That would be the real disaster. It's whether or not actually the party has realised how big a slap in the face this is and has actually woken up and thought, we cannot just continue to coast like this.
I mean, there's the... I mean, Peter Caldwell, look, you know, there's no doubt at all they're going to realise the full horror of this. Looks like Rishi Sunak, Oliver Dowden, James Cleverly, Kemi Badenoch, even Gillian Keegan are likely to keep their seats on this prediction. But Penny Mordaunt, Grant Shapps, Johnny Mercer, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. Alex Chalk as well, looking likely that they will go up. But I'm thinking Jeremy Hunt really would be the Portillo moment.
That's the Portillo moment, yeah.
All because there's still question marks about Richard Holden, the party chair.
Yeah.
In terms of what happens next with the Conservatives, where do they go?
Well, on Monday the party board will meet, but I think in the meantime, probably early tomorrow morning, Rishi Sunak will resign. That will trigger a leadership election. He will remain as leader of the Conservative Party and leader of the opposition until then. But we'll see which people come forward. We'll see if Penny Mordaunt makes it through. It doesn't look as if she's going to.
So much of the leadership battle is going to depend on
who survives.
Are you still in him being able to run?
Exactly, and there are all sorts of questions around that. Also, whether Victoria Atkins gets through. She's a dark horse in all of this.
Really?
Yeah.
Again, there are some names that are mentioned, and you just find yourself going, really?
But she's on the One Nation run. I think. He's been around for a while. I mean,
but do we think the big question marks about Robert Jenrick's seat? Indeed, he may be one of the first sort of big beasts, although he's out of government now. Yes. He may be one of the seats that we'll find out the soonest.
In New York, yeah, exactly. It's interesting with. I mean, I spoke to a very senior Conservative recently, someone who until a few minutes ago was a senior person in Number 10, and who said that they thought
they took time out from betting to talk to you. That was nice.
They thought that it would be Victoria Atkins versus Priti Patel in the final two.
I just think these people are living in cloud cuckoo land. Isn't this part of the problem? I don't know. Okay, but in terms of, I mean, Rishi Sunak, I mean, genuinely, I'm thinking worst case scenario for him. He's led the party to massive defeat. I don't think the whole thing is down to him. I really don't. I mean, Tories go, oh, it's all down to Rishi Sunak. With someone different, it would have been a different result.
Show me the person who inherited what Liz Truss left. But
for me, he's still an MP. That's. I don't think that was the plan.
No, perhaps not. On who knows, he may stand down. You know, there are prime ministers who have done this at various points. We will see. But yes, you mentioned Robert Jenrick. I've just looked up New York here in the exit poll forecast. 83% that he will hold that. So we'll see what happens there. And Rishi Sunak, 99% Conservative hold.
Yeah, indeed. And again, these are still projections. We've had the Conservatives saying, look, we see how these go. But the exit polls are very, very accurate, aren't they? In terms of if you just one word, well, two words, who do you think the next Tory leader will be?
Priti Patel.
Priti Patel. Oh, the eyebrows being raised all over the place here. Right, we're going to hear more from Peter Caldwell. We'll hear more from you. We'll hear more from Richard Palisade, more from Benedict Spence. We'll give you the results again. Up next, we are going to be talking to former Scottish First Minister Alex Salmond about what on earth has happened to the SNP, the party he used to lead. More coming up here on Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Stay tuned.
your side. This is Talk.
Well, good evening. This is indeed Talk, the home of common sense. Our election night special with you all the way and, well, throughout the night. I'll be here till 1 a.m. Mike Graham coming up then, and then Ian Collins. And, well, what a night it is. We haven't yet got a single actual election result, but we do have the exit poll. That was out just over 1 hour ago. And it is a 170-strong majority for Labour. It's really, no question at all, a Labour landslide. It is a Tory bloodbath. But as many Conservatives are saying, it's not as bad as they thought it was. Well, thank heaven for small mercies, they might say. 410 MPs. That is what the exit poll predicts for Sir Keir Starmer. Conservatives down to 131 seats. Liberal Democrats, a massive big increase for them, up from 12 in 2019 to 61. And perhaps the most controversial prediction of all, Reform UK on 13 seats. The hardest to predict, many are saying. SNP down to 10. Their number of seats has been slashed from 43 just 5 years ago. 2 MPs for the Greens, that's double. They've done better than anyone, that's all we could certainly say. But a majority of 170 for Labour. Well, we've been talking to top guests throughout the show. Delighted to say we've got Lord Robert Hayward, Tory peer and pollster, back in the studio. And also delighted to be joined right now by Alex Salmond, former Scottish First Minister and currently leader, obviously, of the Alba Party. Previously, of course, the leader of the SNP. I've got to ask you first, Alex Salmond, what the hell has happened to your former party? 43 out of 59 MPs in Scotland last time round, slashed to just 10 on this prediction. Why do you think that's happened?
Well, it's the slaughter of the innocents, isn't it? I mean, it's a devastating reversal for the SNP. It's not to do with independence. I mean, there's plenty of London commentators crowing tonight they've seen the back of independence. But just to give you an example, I mean, when I won a landslide for the SNP in 2011, independence support was about 30%. Now independence support's 50%, and the SNP are getting a complete drubbing. So what's actually happened is the SNP are paying the price for probably 4 years of... Well, the only worse government I can think of in living memory than the SNP in Scotland over the last 3 or 4 years is the Tories at Westminster. I mean, you know, they've been competing...
Quite a low bar.
The pair of them have been competing to be the 2 worst governments in history, and they've both paid a very, very heavy price. So the SNP... Were they bad, but in different ways? Tell me the top 3 things you think that went wrong under Nicola Sturgeon, and of course, I mean, we got another 5 leaders since then. Well, I mean, when Nicola Sturgeon, I mean, people are asking the questions tonight, is it about police investigations and tents and charges and all the rest of it? No. What it's about is the kamikaze policy of self-identification, you know, the ludicrous idea that anybody can nominate their sex at a whim, which, of course, came to its disgraceful denouement when they couldn't explain why a male rapist should be put into a female prison. I mean, this sort of stuff, it doesn't go down well with anybody. I mean, the number of people who support that nonsense in Scotland is in single figures. Yeah. But there's also things like bottle schemes, there's ferries that haven't been built, there's wastage of hundreds of millions of pounds here and there in a time of austerity. You know, the SNP built their position on not just on the cause of independence, but on competence in government. So back in 2014, when we lost narrowly an independence referendum, not one person says, oh, you can't run the Scottish Parliament, you shouldn't be independent. Yeah. It wasn't even an issue. Now, of course, they've undermined the competence in government, which was one of the key pillars of moving forward.
And, of course, one of the key things also, they were going to be dealing with education. We've seen a world-class education system in Scotland basically completely, I mean, absolutely undermined. That is no longer the case, falling way behind England, falling way behind many other countries. I mean, how much do you put that down to Nicola Sturgeon, to Humza Yousaf? I mean, John Swinney has only been in for a short period of time this time round.
Well, I think it's entirely Nicola's legacy. It was a poisoned legacy. The mistake that Humza Yousaf made, and then John Swinney over the last couple of months, is instead of dramatically departing from it, instead of saying, no, this was a bunch of rubbish, we're really sorry, we're going to try and do better, let's have a new policy for a new leader, they sort of slid away from controversial aspects one by one so that nobody noticed. So instead of taking the opportunity that a new leader should to set out their own direction, they've gone for continuity. Yeah. And as someone once famously said, in Scottish politics, continuity doesn't cut it, and now it's decimated the Scottish National Party.
OK, let's come to you, Robert Hayward, not a Tory pick, but also as a pollster. I can remember a time, I'm old enough, long enough to remember a time when we were talking about how, look, you know, I mean, I don't see how Labour can come back to power while the SNP have got all those seats, because Labour have always relied on having all those seats in Scotland that have helped them with power at Westminster as well. But, I mean, this has been a complete change in fortunes. What do you put it down to?
It is a complete change in fortunes, and Alex has rightly identified a fair number of issues in relation to the Scottish Government. I'm not sure that he's quite right. I've been trying to turn up some polls in Scotland about independence. I think the figure in favour of independence is now, on opinion polls, below that against independence, not by a huge margin.
But nevertheless, the support for independence has stayed high despite the SNP plummeting in the polls.
Because it's a cause rather than a brand, which political parties are in England in a different way.
Is that because people have gone, well, we'll put independence on the back burner, we've got other things to deal with, like the cost of living?
But I think we will see. I'd be surprised if the SNP are as low as is predicted by the exit poll. I don't think they'll be massively higher, but they will be. I will be surprised if they're not higher.
I think that's a fair point. I think there's one or two, looking at the detail of the exit poll and applying it to the constituencies in Scotland, there's one or two where you would say that doesn't look likely. I mean, if you take Aberdeenshire North, for example, where Douglas Ross has been disowned effectively by his own party because he knifed in the back poor David Duguid, who was in intensive care in hospital. I mean, short of cutting off his life support, I've never seen anything quite like it in politics. So whether he can win against that sort of reputation,
we'll see. We're not likely to see any seats in Scotland until about 1 o'clock in the morning. East Kilbride and Strathaven, Hamilton and Clyde Valley and Rutherglen will provide the first indication of patterns of voting.
He's correcting your Scottish.
Yes, I can't even pronounce the Alba part.
It wasn't the pronunciation. Can I just warn you, and I'd warn listeners, returning officers say what their target time
doesn't necessarily mean.
But they regularly are an hour to 90 minutes out.
This is true. I've covered a lot of election nights.
As bad as politicians. They're telling us to lie all the time. Dreadful.
And all the indications of those seats that I've been trawling through so far, which have been overwhelmingly English, they are some very, very close calls.
Which means it can be slowed down because they
which is what I indicated earlier, that there will be winners on low percentages, but probably more recounts.
Well, the thing is, I mean, you know what's interesting, of course, I mean, it's different when we see some of the other elections we've had recently with the local elections where, you know, some councils, some start counting immediately, some don't start counting, like the London mayoral election, they don't start counting till the next day. All 650 seats start counting at 10 o'clock on the dot. Now, the first seat to declare, we expect to be, OK, anyone's going to correct any of this, Blyth and Ashington, or Houghton and Sunderland South, both in Tyne and Wear, well, in Tyne and Wear, sorry. The both seats North East England, both are being defended by Labour, although we're looking at lots of changes in the boundaries. A lot of these seats are sort of new seats, slightly changed names. The expectation is that Blyth and Ashington could actually declare in less than 10 minutes. That would be pretty early. We normally expect around 11:30. What would we be looking, Robert, to hear there that could tell us whether the exit poll was right or that it was horribly, horribly wrong and all the pollsters are going to lose their jobs?
Unfortunately, the seats you cited are not exactly representative of anything.
They're Labour seats.
They're Labour seats. I think what you will see is a large reform vote. This is the sort of territory which has voted UKIP and Brexit. It voted to leave, whether it's Sunderland or Blythe Valley. The whole of the North East was heavily a leave area, and that's where the first declarations will come from. So I'd give a guidance to all those who are watching or listening to this broadcast. Don't take the reform figure as a guide for the rest of the results.
I understand John Curtis is saying, you know, the doyens of political predictions is saying that he thinks it's perfectly possible Reform could only be getting 3 seats, which is interesting. Coming back to you, Alex Salmond, look, you know, Alba Party, you know, first leader of the SNP, and now the Alba Party, looking at what Nigel Farage has done and Richard Tice have done with Reform, Reform UK. Look, you know, he did it with UKIP, he did it with the Brexit Party, and everyone. It's amazing the people on the sort of Remain side who say, look, this guy's always been a 7 times failed attempt to be an MP. He was an MEP for many years, of course. You know, he's a failure. Of course, I would say the most, you know, influential figure in British politics in the last generation. It does look like 99% chance, according to this exit poll, of Nigel Farage winning that seat in Clacton, even though he's only been campaigning there for the 6 weeks. Reform UK's deputy leader David Bull says the political revolt has only just started. Before you answer that, I do apologise. We had actually got an early result. Houghton and Sunderland South in Tyne and Wear, they are actually announcing their results right now. We will expect that, of course, that to be as defended by Labour to be a Labour seat. It had, of course, you know, that won't necessarily tell us anything. But these early seats, as you've just said, Robert, don't tell us very much. But it does look like, yeah, we've got a Labour hold 18,837 votes for the Labour. This coming second, we are, interestingly, now this is very interesting. Coming second is the Reform candidate with 11,668, and then the Conservatives under half that, around 5,500. What do you read into that?
It's precisely what I was saying just now. That this is territory which we will see replicated in places like South Yorkshire, North Nottinghamshire and the like. Very heavy Reform territory. The Conservatives have never had a real hold, although the Conservatives held Blythe Valley at the last election. Very different constituency, and therefore no surprise whatsoever.
I mean, again, if you combine that vote, you're looking at 70,000, just under the vote for the Labour Party. This is, of course, I mean, the first big beast of the Labour Party getting through. Bridget Phillipson, of course, Shadow Education Secretary. Your reaction to that, first of all, Alexander?
Well, I mean, I agree with Robert. I mean, I think one of the stories from Reform is still going to pile up lots of votes. It looks like they're going to make a parliamentary bridgehead breakthrough. As you know, I disagree with Nigel Farage on just about everything. But I do have sympathy for insurgent parties trying to break through the first-past-the-post system. And if Reform have pulled it off, then they deserve congratulations despite our disagreement.
It's incredibly hard to do in a first-past-the-post
system. Exactly. I mean, it took me 25 years to do it with the SNP. It took 25 years for myself and other people to break the Labour Party in Scotland and break past first-past-the-post, which is why I'm so anguished about that leadership position being handed back to the Labour Party with apparently no effort whatsoever. But of course, with Alapa, I'm working on a shorter timescale. but Alapa has one big advantage over Reform, and that is that the next elections in Scotland, of course, are proportional elections. Whereas if Alapa, for example, get 15% of the vote, which is what Reform is being suggested around the Reform vote and first-past-the-post, and Alapa in Scotland would get 24 seats in a parliament 129. Now that's the difference that PR can make.
And that's something we know, that the smaller parties always push for PR. Labour Party have flirted a bit with PR. The funny thing is, any party that gets elected on first past the post suddenly loses interest in the PR thing. I mean, I'm certainly looking at what's going on in the European continent right now in terms of how long. I mean, I think Belgium taken a year to put together a coalition government, for goodness sake. I'm not entirely sure that it's a solution to our problems.
But then, well, I mean, obviously, the headline of the night is Keir Starmer's got a thumping majority, of course. The underlying story, of course, is that it looks like a substantial realignment of the right in English politics. And maybe if in the future we're going to see, from the demise or collapse of the SNP, a realignment of the national politics in Scotland. These are all implications that are coming from
these are just massive, big, game-changing moments, aren't they? I mean, I think so much of the shtick, let's be honest, of the SNP, and I think the Labour Party as well, is this: we don't want to be ruled by those ghastly, horrible Tories in Westminster. Every time Boris Johnson reared his head when he was Prime Minister, you guys were all cheering, brilliant, another boost for Scottish independence. But if you've got a Labour Party in Scotland, and you've got a huge number of people in Scotland, it would appear from this exit poll, who voted Labour, you've lost that.
But Julia, I became First Minister of Scotland in 2007. The Labour government was in Westminster. I won the First Ministership. The SNP won, for the first time in its history, a general election in Scotland with Labour in power at Westminster. Now, if you just devote yourself to being an anti-Tory party and say things like, I hate all Tories and all that nonsense, but you might dislike the Conservative policies, but you shouldn't confuse the pursuit of independence, which is a noble cause, with just disliking the Tory party.
You know I'm a big fan of Scottish independence.
Well, I
want them to go away and stop moaning about the English. Rob's favourite.
While Alex has been speaking, I've been looking at more Scottish constituencies, and interestingly enough, the exit poll forecast both the Aberdeenshire seats to be Conservative holds and significantly Angus and Perthshire Glens to be a Conservative gain. So I'm not surprised that if the SNP have gone down that far, that there would be one or two Tory gains. I'm not getting carried away as a Tory hat on.
That would be
as an analyst, I think there may be one or two Tory gains.
Let me ask you more about sort of British Westminster politics as well, Alex Salmon, because you've sat in Westminster for a long time as well. What do you think? We're almost not even concentrating that much. What does a Labour government bring? Has Keir Starmer and his shadow cabinet, about to be a cabinet, have they had enough scrutiny? Do we really know what they're going to do, what it means for the country at large? Because it impacts Scotland just as much as it does the rest of the country.
It might help a little if I answer a question asked to me by a taxi driver. He asked me, how is it that Keir
Politicians
Starmer...
and taxi drivers.
Yes.
I'm not going to answer your question, but I'll answer the one that the taxi driver...
But how is it that Keir Starmer's heading for this massive victory, but nobody likes him? That's the question I was asked.
No, it was very little enthusiasm.
Well, let's put it that way. Well, of course, if you actually analyse this, if the exit poll is correct, Keir Starmer will win this landslide. Well done to him, massive landslide, great achievement, all the rest of it, but less seats than Tony Blair had in 1997, and also, perhaps even more interestingly, less votes and a lower percentage vote that Jeremy Corbyn had in defeat in 2017.
Very interesting. There isn't actually that enthusiasm. You can definitely feel that. People aren't talking about, can't wait to see what happens.
But the difference is the right, that is the Conservatives and Reform, are now split almost down the middle in terms of the voting share. And that's the difference between a landslide and explains why Sir Keir Starmer will have a massive majority without enthusiasm.
Do you think, our Labour guest was saying earlier, could be looking at a second term, haven't even started the first term yet? I mean, talk about counting your chickens. I mean, people were saying that about Boris Johnson in December 2019. I remember sitting here in a different studio time, but basically everyone was saying, 2 cups easy. Politics is different now. There is not that allegiance that people have, this is what my mum and my dad voted this way and that's how I vote, end of. People's allegiances have broken down. We've got a much more sort of vibrant, movable feast in terms of the voting public. But here's the thing, does that say to you, a majority of 170, all this is, does that make life easy for Keir Starmer, or actually having such a big majority can bring with it, weirdly, its own problems? You've got an awful lot of backbenchers, an awful lot of people who conform into different groups, you've got an awful lot of people who aren't going to be offered seats on the government payroll.
That's the key figure. The key figure is you've only got about 100 government jobs. If you've got 350 or more MPs, or 411 or whatever it is, then there's three quarters of your party doesn't have a government job.
MPs.
That's the biggest problem.
And every time someone else gets promoted and you don't, I mean, do you think that's going to be an issue, Lord Hamer?
Please, Robert. But no, it will be an issue. There's no question about it. And idle hands, in terms of work, etc., will bring dissent, make dissent much more easy.
I just want you to know, by the way, when I am Empress, and it's only a matter of time, I will expect you to use my full title. Lord Robert Haven, more from you throughout the evening. Alex Salmon, fantastic to have you. Thank you very much. Former Scottish First Minister, leader of the Alba Party. I just pronounce it differently every time to keep him happy. 11:21 is the time. So much more coming up. Do stay tuned. This is Talk. It's the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good evening to you. 11:24 is the time. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Well, we've been talking about the exit poll with our guests, Richard Power Said, former Labour Party official, Benedict Spence, Conservative commentator, still with us, Robert Hayward, Tory peer and pollster. We actually had, while Richard and Benedict were out of the studio, we actually had an actual result. Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Education Secretary, re-elected in Sunderland South. What was really interesting about that election, I thought, though, Richard, was the fact that there was such a big Reform vote. She was on 18,000 plus. Reform came in second place, chasing heels at about 11,600 votes. What do you make of that?
You know what? Earlier I was saying, gosh, I'm a bit worried about Reform coming in second place in Labour constituencies. And of course, Bridget Phillipson, our fantastic Shadow Education Secretary, hopefully now the real Education Secretary.
Grovelling away, wants a job. Let's face it, you're the only person in this studio who's going to get a job in the next government.
It is my job to be polite about these people, and she's done a pretty fantastic job so far, I'd say. Point is, and this is really good news as far as I'm concerned, maybe not you folks, that actually the combined Tory and Reform vote has basically stayed the same, whereas Labour has gone up by a couple of thousand. So that's a really good sign. So you're talking about
Reform UK taking Tory votes there rather than taking Labour votes. We know, because Robert Hayward, you were saying earlier, actually Reform are taking a bit of votes from mostly from the Tories, some from Labour, but also some from the I wasn't going to bother voting, I was going to stay at home.
Absolutely. And I think it's an interesting point, and we can start arguing about numbers, but at the last election, in many constituencies, the turnout dropped dramatically, particularly on the Labour side, because people would not vote for Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah. And therefore, to say that the Labour vote has gone up, that's just a few of the people who abstained in that constituency.
Last time round, indeed. Well, Bridget Phillipson, speaking after declaration in her seat, said the people have spoken, and if the exit poll this evening is again a guide to results across our country, as it so often is, after 14 years, the British people have chosen change, she said. They have chosen Labour, they have chosen the leadership of Keir Starmer. Benedict Spence, that's a Conservative commentator. I haven't felt the vibe, even from many people I know who are staunch Labour supporters, that this has been a positive, just that the Keir Starmer is going to change the country. That was, that was the word that was on the podium, on the backdrops, and on, all over the manifesto, along with all the pictures of Keir Starmer in his shirt sleeves. Change. And the question is, change to what?
Well, I suppose this is going to be the problem, is actually what is it that they can do structurally to improve the fortunes of the country? They've been rather reticent about all of this, because they're scared of, spooking the horses. In whatever direction that may be, we have yet to see, obviously. I remember when Tony Blair was in power, actually, there was a lot of things in the manifesto were not, in fact, the sort of the key achievements of the Blair years. Often they would do a lot of obfuscation there. But just to sort of pick up on something that Richard said, which was that the combined Tory Reform vote actually went down slightly. How old is Reform again? It's 11,000 plus votes for a party that, and in fact, a couple of weeks ago, many of those voters may not have even knew existed. That is a seismic change. And
interesting what Alex Salmond said. It took him over 20 years to get the SNP to that stage.
And now those guns will be trained on the party of government, which is going to be Labour, and that is going to be a really interesting thing to see how they then approach taking those votes away.
Your reaction to that, Richard Said, as a former Labour official, and hey, let's face it, hopefully future Labour official. As at the end of this show, if we could achieve nothing else, can we get Richard a job?
Wouldn't that be delightful? I'm quite happy where I am, but that's very kind of you. Look, I actually think the job for Reform is rather more complicated than Benedict perhaps is describing there, because in fact Reform know their job in Parliament is to actually make life difficult for the Conservative Party. I don't mean they won't be attacking Labour. I don't mean that won't be difficult sometimes, but ultimately, Starmer has made it very clear that he thinks the way that he wins the election after this one is by having maintained you know, sort of the most boring levels of stability you can possibly achieve in the terrible global economic and geopolitical context that we are in, and that you don't do that by pandering to the Reform Party.
Here's the thing, stability. Now, you talked about that. I think a lot of people, after the chaos, they want a bit of stability, and you kind of count the prime ministers in and counting them out again. Yeah, all very well. I wonder how much stability there will be with the Corbynistas in the party. And yes, Jeremy Corbyn likely to lose his seat in Islington. However, you've got an awful lot of people who wanted to put a lot of pressure on the Labour leadership over issues like Gaza, who are going to be causing trouble. You've got Angela Rayner, who, you know, look, I know that you couldn't put a cigarette paper between Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner. Of course you couldn't. Look, there is no love lost between these two people, and there'll be a power struggle at some point between the left and the right of the party. Do you think that Keir Starmer's position is so solid now that he can just basically do what he's Tony Blair in that sense? He can do what he wants?
I think it's rock solid as long as he keeps on with that ruthless focus on A, growth, and B, living standards. It's going to be...
But how does he do that?
Right, absolutely. It's a really good question. So
that was a great politician's answer. Whenever anyone says it's a really good question, you think, yeah, and what's the answer?
Give me time for thought.
Yes.
Short term, it's that cash injection that you've heard so much from Rachel Reeves about. You're going to get your
injection?
The cash injection that
you've
you
heard
get
about, you know, the cash injection.
The cash
you all know the
injection.
cash injection, right?
Hands up, everybody.
Who's heard of the cash injection?
We're giving you more time to think.
This might possibly be sort of like a wonky, geeky Labour Party thing, but I think everyone else has heard about it. Wonky, yes. Yeah, there you go. So the cash injection comes from taxes on non-doms, on energy giants, on hedge funders,
That's
and
all
on private schools.
For, isn't it?
So, and that goes to 6,500 new teachers, 40,000 NHS appointments a week, and 16,000 cops and PCSOs on our streets.
Every third school will get one extra teacher.
Right.
I mean, party. I mean, you know, our education system will be transformed.
It's better than fewer teachers, was what we had over 14 years.
But right, it's not changed.
So that is the immediate cash injection that we're going to get over the next couple of weeks with the spending review. The spending review, that's what we're going to get, I think, very quickly. And then, absolutely, it's about bringing foreign direct investment into the UK through, you know, like there's going to be this Mark Carney task force that already exists. There's going to be the summer investment summit.
I don't even think you believe what you're saying right now. I really don't. But it is. I mean, this is one of the things we've been talking about on the shows and regular on the show. Again, this idea, you know, what change you're going to get? How much is it? And actually, it is a whole "don't frighten the horses," carrying that Ming vase very, very gingerly, you know, across the obstacle course to get to power. But we had that really telling line from Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, the other day. I would say one of the best performers of the Labour Party. And he was saying, look, you know, the manifesto isn't the sum of everything we're going to do. And as you hinted at there earlier, Benedict, it isn't. There are going to be other things. But the Institute for Fiscal Studies and other think tanks are basically saying, look, you haven't even counted for the, you know, tax-wise for the things you're going to do. And the things that you're going to have to do, like defence spending, like more spending on the health department, like more spending on, you know, dealing with other issues. You haven't accounted for any of that. There's so much more that needs to be done. Stability ain't going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, where the foreign investment's going to come after the Labour Party goes after things like, you know, non-doms and, you know, bankers and all that sort of thing. The international people with money are going to look at this country and go, oh, yes, this is exactly where I want to put my money. This party that robs the rich to pay for one extra teacher per school. That's not going to work. That's not really going to hack it. And the thing is, to go back to what we were talking about, where it is that Reform are going to sort of pick up support here, what are the two things that they are big on at the moment? Lower taxes and immigration. Do we really think that the Labour Party is going to affect either of those things? The
things that stop people voting Tory. Can I just say, I just want to interrupt, apologies to interrupt, but we've had our second result of the evening, Blyth and Ashington, and as predicted, as expected, it is a Labour hole. There is a new seat, newly created seat in Northumberland. Notionally, if you allow for the boundary changes, Labour defending a notional majority of 6,100. We are looking at a big vote, more than 20,000 for the Labour candidate. Again, Reform UK coming in second on 10,000, almost 11,000, and the Conservatives coming in third place on just about 6,000. Quick reaction to that, Robert Hayward.
It is precisely what I said. We're in the North East, strong reform area, strong Leave area previously, and therefore I would expect many of these seats to produce very strong
you can't necessarily extrapolate that to...
Absolutely not. They're not going to be reflective. The Tories have never had a stronghold in most of those seats. Part of that Blythe constituency was Conservative in the first big shock in 2019.
Right, OK. Well, those are the first 2 seats. They are Labour holds, as predicted. But interestingly, Reform UK coming second. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean we can extrapolate from that. That's one of the frustrating things about the early seats that are announced. But if you are just tuning in, we are looking at an exit poll predicting a majority of 170 for Labour. That is 410 seats for Labour, 131 for the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats on 61. Reform predicted to get 13. SNP absolutely collapsed their vote to less than a quarter to 10, and 2 for the Greens. That majority of 170 being handed to Keir Starmer. There's no doubt at all, unless that exit poll is unbelievably wrong and there won't be a single pollster left in the country. They'll all have fled on their private jets, no doubt. If they are wrong, we are looking at Keir Starmer walking into number 10 tomorrow morning. We'll take a quick break. Do stay tuned. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, good evening to you. It's 11:37 on exit poll night and election night. We've already got 2 results in. They are Labour holds in the 2 seats, very much predicted to be Labour holds. We got, of course, Blythe and Ashington and Houghton and Sunderland South, both Labour holds. But interestingly, Reform UK coming second in both of those seats. But we are told by Lord Robert Hayward, our Tory peer and pollster in the studio, not to read too much into that, even though that exit poll out at 10 o'clock, as soon as the polling stations closed this evening, did predict Reform winning 13 seats, far higher. It's up with one of the mega polls, but actually far higher than Reform themselves have been privately predicting. Let's talk right now to another guest who's a journalist and Labour Party activist, Paul Mason, who joins us on the line. Good evening to you, Paul.
Good to see you, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. Well, look, what is your reaction? A prediction of a majority of 170 for Labour, 410 MPs. It's just a small bit down, 9 seats down from Tony Blair's big majority of 97.
I should be saying it's the best day of my political life, because I do remember many, many Labour defeats, including 1983, 1979. I'm old enough to remember those. And it is. We're at the end of a political era. The Tories are finished. And you look at those two results. I'm not happy about Reform coming second to Labour, but I think this is a real pattern. I think both Houghton and Sunderland South and Blythe Valley are ex-mining constituencies. And so it's very clear what's happened is that pro-Brexit working class people who are never that keen on voting Tory, kind of Boris Johnson kind of hook them in a bit. So what's happened, I've switched to Reform. What's happened in Sunderland South is that a more or less straight switch. Brexit were on about 7,000 last time. They've gone to 11 and as Reform. And the Tories were on about 12 and they've gone down to 6 as the Tories. So we'll see in parts of Northern England, I think Reform will be the second. But that's a problem for the future. It's a problem that I, as a socialist, am appalled by.
Why appalled?
Well, the leader of Reform made disparaging comments about 2.8 million British people who are Muslims. I don't find that very appetising at any time of the day.
What disparaging remarks did he make?
He made comments about how Muslims don't integrate with our country.
I think he was quoting a poll, was he not, from the Henry Jackson Society, which suggests there were issues about younger Muslims not being integrated.
Yeah,
I think have there not been numerous reports done, including by David Cameron?
There's been plenty of reports done, but what
Trevor Phillips has done whole documentaries about this.
The 2.8 million Muslim people in this country are our friends and allies.
I don't think he was saying they weren't.
Oh, he's otherising them, stigmatising them the same as he does with refugees. And look, if people want to vote for that, fine. You can't eat it. At the end of the day, you can't eat racism. Racism doesn't deliver and put food on the table, and that's what we in Labour have argued. And I'm delighted to say
I have to say, you're on pretty shaky ground, given what happened under Jeremy Corbyn, and I would say what's happening in quite large swathes of the Labour Party right now over Israel.
I don't understand this obsession with Jeremy Corbyn. I've been on the streets campaigning against him. I hope he loses.
No, I know, but I'm talking about parties with a problem with racism. Let's think. Which parties in this country have actually had a formal investigation over racism? The BNP and the Labour Party.
Yeah, Labour, and that was a real stigma for us and something that people like me have worked hard to overcome.
Can I go back to something you said very early on? You said the Tories are finished. Now, there's no doubt at all, if this exit poll is borne out, 131 Conservative MPs. I don't know how far we'd have to go back to find. I'm looking back at, the 1997 elections, Tories were on 165, 166, and a Hague in 2001. They crept back up again, 194. But you know what? They were back in power in 2010 at a coalition and then back in majority then. We saw that, what Benny said was a wipeout of Jeremy Corbyn in 2019 down to 202 seats for Labour then. But, Tory parties collapsing, Labour back in power. Is it a bit premature to say the Tories are finished?
Well, it may be premature, but the Tory party... Look, the last 14 years, we've had a pro-Remain socially liberal Prime Minister in coalition with the Lib Dems, Cameron, then May, then Johnson, then Truss, then Sunak. And none of them have delivered for the British people. And the verdict is what you're seeing tonight. Look, I would be the first to say that Labour has to earn the trust of the people who voted for it and people who've given them the benefit of the doubt, and it must now deliver on the things that it's promising. But the problem we have with it, when I say the Tories are finished, what I mean is the right of politics is splintered fundamentally into this illiberal Reform, UK, whatever you think about them, they're self-defined. They want to spend 144 billion plus. Liz Truss wanted a smaller state. That you can't have two kinds of right-wing politics coexisting with each other than in the form that it's happened, which is Reform have split and they're starting to win and the Tories are losing. And let's remember this, because many of my Tory friends, as a Labour member, I do have Tory friends, they tend to be on the Liberal side of the Tory party, down there in what we call the blue wall. I'm very interested. about what happens there.
Yeah, well, this is going to be very interesting, isn't it? And once we saw that the Conservative, leadership and the campaign, they stopped campaigning in many of the red wall seats. They obviously gave up any hope of some of those seats. We looked at Rishi Sunak campaigning in seats that had a 13,000 majority last time round in the last week. That would not be where you would normally be if you were hopeful at all. Some MPs, Tory MPs, you'd expect to be in completely safe seats, possibly losing their seats tonight. In which case, where does the Conservative Party go after this? You're very much looking at it from the outside. But, if you were advising them as a staunch Labour member, I'm certainly very much on the left of the party, what would you advise?
Well, as I was saying, my feeling is no, for those Conservatives who call themselves Liberals or want to be part of an international order that, for example, would include the European Convention on Human Rights, that the pressure of reform on the Tory party is going to pull the survivors to the right. And I can see Conservatives who would never think about crossing the floor to Labour having to think carefully about whether or not they form something new or link up with the Lib Dems. But that's their problem. Our problem is success. Labour's problem now is that it looks like a huge chunk of the British people have voted for it. Of course, it's a lowish turnout, and we're probably only on about 41%.
Yeah. If that, there are lots of people predicting even lower. But this is the thing also, without all the enthusiasm there was for Blair in 97, and crucially without the billions and billions of money of pounds in the Treasury coffers, there isn't any money. It's all being spent. We're in massive debt. The same in tray of problems, whether it's Rishi Sunak or whether it's Keir Starmer in number 10 tomorrow, is still there. What is Keir Starmer going to do that's going to make people go, yeah, that was the right decision to vote for Labour?
I think Keir Starmer, the first thing he will do, and it's too early to say the exact shape of this at the moment, he'll look at the shape of the majority, he'll look at the shape of the electoral coalition of the voters, the millions of voters who put him there, and he'll take the temperature of that coalition and ask himself, how do I keep this going? Because it will include people who have very different views to me on migration. It will include people to the left of me, people way to the right of me. And Keir's job is to hold that coalition together. I have no doubt that he will do it by saying, let's be absolutely clear, and your viewers and listeners are very interested in this. I don't think this is going to be a woke government. I think it's going to be a government that just focuses on the deliverables, on economics, on crime, on migration, on the task force, the Border Patrol task force. I think that you asked me what I think.
Yeah, I think it'd be really intriguing, because I think a lot of people's fears about a Labour government is that going down that woke route. We'll leave it there. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Appreciate you joining us. Paul Mason is a journalist and Labour Party activist. Going to come to you, Benedict Spence, Conservative commentator, sitting in the studio with us. Your reaction to this, because one of the biggest fears a lot of people have been saying is we're going to have this sort of explosion of woke. Tories tried to sort of use that as part of their campaign armoury, didn't they?
Yeah, I think we'll have to wait and see actually what the underlying numbers are for the Labour Party. Actually, if they're getting lots of seats with quite large majorities so their MPs feel comfortable, maybe you might get that. But they'd be very foolish to take that tack if there's lots and lots of marginals that we're talking about here, because as has been pointed out, these are not particularly popular things. Leaning too heavily into what are called cultural war issues when what people want is competent government is not a very smart move at all. But is that going to be something that Keir Starmer can avoid? Because there are a lot of members in his party who really want that sort of thing.
And he hasn't avoided it in the past. I mean, coming back to you, Richard Powell-Syed, a former Labour official. I mean, come on, the taking the knee for Black Lives Matter, the trans women are women. It's wrong to say that not only women have a cervix. I mean, some women have penises. All of that madness and stuff. I mean, that is not what I think even most Labour voters want. But there's no doubt there's a big constituency within the Labour MPs and in the people who shout the loudest among the activists that they'll want that stuff. And we saw, Joe Biden did all of that stuff in America, which within hours, frankly, of being elected supposedly as this sort of moderate leader. Do you think that Keir Starmer will be able to resist those urges?
Keir Starmer is going to do exactly what he's always said he was going to do, which is focus rigorously on living standards, and I think that's the only way of keeping that electoral coalition together. I would point out that there are loads of people on the right of politics in this country who think that their best bet electorally, this is of course what Lee Anderson has literally said, that is cultural wars issues. They think that dividing our communities is the way to electoral power. Divide and rule.
I don't think it was the right that did that.
Well, you know what?
We had any choice but to fight back.
Well, you know what? Over and over and over again, people get asked by pollsters, what do you care about electorally? And they never say this stuff. And that
they also don't care about net zero. You're still thrusting that down our throats.
Well, that's not true. The environment usually comes up. The environment comes up third in people's. The environment comes up third on YouGov voting intention focus polls, and all of these
except when you tell them what it'll cost.
And all of these culture wars issues don't, and that is why reform is never going to form a government.
I love it if we never discuss culture war issues ever. That's because we didn't have insane people saying things like some women have penises, and until every single MP and politician in this country doesn't say stupid, blatantly untrue things like that publicly and privately, then I'm going to keep talking about it. Now we're going to take a break. We are expecting Sunderland Central to declare. It's very much expected to be a Labour hold. These early seats are all likely to be Labour holds. You can't read into that on the exit poll. The exit poll is looking at across the whole country. Got a nod from Robert Hayward on that one. We'll take a quick break. Plenty more coming up from this bunch. This is Talk, the home, sometimes, of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Oh, well, good evening to you. It's coming up to 11:53. This is on the night of the election. Of course, if you're just tuning in, if you didn't know that, God, you lucky, lucky things. You missed 6 weeks of absolute abject nonsense. Being told, basically, well, the world was going to end if you voted the wrong way. Well, look, people have voted. We've already got, I think, two results we've got in. A third we're just waiting for. Sunderland Central expected to be a Labour hold. We'll bring you the results of that as soon as we get it. But we have got that exit poll, of course, a Labour majority of 170. And good news for the Labour Party. Keir Starmer getting 410 MPs, but it does look like there's possibility of trouble for certainly one member of his shadow cabinet, Thangam Degbonair, in Bristol, where the Greens are challenging her then. But also, Robert Hayward, who's a Tory peer and pollster who's in the studio with us throughout this evening, you said there's also trouble perhaps for another candidate.
I think it's a question of the performance of the Muslim candidates who are generally standing as independents or members of the
and these are sort of like it's over Gaza.
It's over Gaza primarily. And I've got an initial indication that Rushnara Ali and Bethnal Green and Bow is in difficulty. Now, whether that turns out because you don't know which boxes people are looking at the early stage, so it comes with a highly qualified...
And again, when people talk about, people are getting an idea, what this comes down to is they literally take all the ballot papers, they're on the trestle tables, and they're being counted, and then you can see the piles going up for one candidate and not so big for another. And then, of course, sometimes when there is a very close-run thing, the agents and the candidates are brought to look at some of the ballot papers that have possibly been spoilt, and they have a look, or are they spoilt, aren't they? What particular appendage can you draw in which box on a ballot paper and it's still valid? I mean, they literally have these conversations. I've been at counts where they've done that.
I think of more significance possibly is a question you asked me earlier in the evening, which was the question of turnout. And I said that we would not have the final figures until all the results were in. But what is striking of the first two results, the turnouts are down by just about or just under 4% in each case, which would be depressing for Democrats like myself.
Well, yeah, I mean, the turnout in 2019 was 67.3% overall, and that was quite a lot down on 2017. I think a lot of people would be surprised that the vote was lower in 2019 than 2017, given that it felt like such a big change.
I think that's true, but people also were very clear about the result. In 2017, the Conservatives went into the election with a huge lead in the polls, and they managed to destroy it in one manifesto launch. So therefore, therefore.
But that said, Theresa May put 3 percentage points on her vote from the 2015 vote. For which David Cameron had won, again, even though lost loads of MPs and had to be propped up by the DUP. I mean, simpler, happier times. I suppose that was the chaos that you've been talking about. Richard Powside, former Labour Party official, still with us, of course, along with Benedict Spence, Conservative commentator. Let's look ahead to what we're going to hear very soon, because we are expecting to hear Sunderland Central's result. I don't think there's going to be any surprises there. It depends, of course, whether we see, yet again, Reform UK really sort of snapping at the heels of the Conservatives and overtaking by a long way, as they've done in the two previous seats in Blythe, Ashington and Houghton and Sunderland South. The Tory candidate. We're looking ahead after midnight. We are expecting to get 2 seats. It would be interesting. Swindon South is the first battleground seat of the night to declare. Former Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland is defending a majority of just 5,500 there. I mean, that would look pretty precarious on these sort of figures.
It would be astonishing if he held it.
You think he's almost certainly out. But also Basildon and Billericay in Essex. That result's due. That could be one of the sort of Portillo moments. Well, it would be if people knew who this guy was. Would you? I'm calling it as it is, guys. Richard Holden, the Conservative Party chairman. Now he's standing in that seat. He basically parachuted himself in as the only option for the local Conservative Party to choose. Hello, it's just me, after basically his seat further north had just completely disappeared. And there's now some possibility, extraordinarily, Richard Powside, that he could lose that seat. So are we in Chris Patton 1992 territory in Bath when he was ousted as Tory Party chairman, even though John Major went on to win?
Well, yes, except for the point that you've just made, that the people that we're counting as Conservative big beasts these days don't feel quite like the big beasts of old, and that's partly because...
Well, not household names, are they?
It's also that after 14 years, this kind of ancien regime has kind of so lost its talent and its integrity that the people who are kind of being lost are just not quite as impressive as they might have been. But what you're going to see with Basildon and Billericay. It's this...
Basildon Man. I mean, we all heard about Basildon Man during the Blair years, didn't we?
Quite. And you're going to... You know, what's really exciting is that you're just seeing in Essex, yes, but then, you know, kind of going up the coast of East Anglia and also down into Thanet, all the way along the south coast, all the way to loads of seats in Cornwall. Labour's going to be taking, I hope, a really kind of broad sweep of these seaside towns which have been so undermined by our economic model, and absolutely they were promised levelling up. It didn't happen. And, you know, I really believe that Keir Starmer's Labour Party can do that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. I don't. I'm going to be honest, I just don't. I just think, well, with what? I mean, with what? Benedict Spence. I mean, looking at these seats, we're told we're going to see some big beasts going. You know, we're going to be seeing, Jeremy Hunt, yay! I'm sorry, there are some people I just don't want to be in politics. Jeremy Hunt out. We're talking, Penny Mordaunt might lose her seat. Even, some people, Robert Jenrick is a possibility of someone who's a possible contender. Grant Shapps and others. What do you make of this?
I think anybody who's heard of Richard Holden will shed very few tears to know that he's in trouble. And given the nature of how, as you alluded to, how it was that he parachuted himself in.
I mean, the irony.
There was nothing more emblematic of the way that the Conservative Party has set itself up very badly and has managed to irritate and isolate even its staunchest supporters by taking them for fools. And this is the end result, ultimately, of poor governance, is that, surprise, surprise, the voters will punish you for that. Yeah. If you can't even stitch up your own seat correctly, well, what hope have you got?
That kind of tells you, this is up there with, let the Prime Minister stand outside and announce the election in the pouring rain. And why don't you just leave the commemorations for D-Day early? Yeah, exactly. I have to say, Richard and Benedict staying with us. Robert Hayward is leaving us now, getting a well-earned...
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the show. This is indeed Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, with you all the way till 1 o'clock. Then Mike Graham will be here, taking you through till 4, and then, of course, Ian Collins. Now, we're just about to get, I think, the third result of the night. We have already had results in 2. The other seats actually being counted in the same counting hall in Newcastle upon Tyne. But Sunderland Central is, as everyone's predicted, a Labour hold. And interestingly, again, Reform UK coming second. It does appear 16,852 for Labour in Sunderland Central, 10,779 for Reform UK. The Conservative result, just 5,731. Peter Cardwell has joined us once again, not just a talk presenter, but also our resident political wonk. That is the word we are choosing to use tonight. We've double-checked it for Ofcom reasons. But I mean, we've got 3 results in, all very predictably Labour holds. We can't, lots of people go, oh, well, it's going to be a Labour slide. Look, it's already a Labour landslide. 170 majority, 410 MPs they're predicted against only 131 for the Conservatives. But how significant do you think it is how well Reform UK are doing in all 3 of these seats? I mean, these were big Leave voting seats,
Absolutely,
weren't they?
and we've got Reform UK, for example, in the one just declared, Sunderland Central, just about 5,000 votes, fewer than 5,000 votes behind Labour. And this is really interesting for Keir Starmer, because the question for him is how free is he to govern? And if he has a lot of his MPs, for example, these 3, but there'll be many others as well, who say, actually, Reform UK are breathing down my neck here. People want to move to the right. There are a lot of people who voted Leave, who vote Labour, but also they're looking to Reform UK. So it'll be really interesting to see how free Keir Starmer is to do the more centre-leftist stuff that he wants to do, when actually there are a lot of people voting for reform.
It's going to be very interesting. Well, look, we're going to get the thoughts of Richard Power Said, who's also in the studio, former Labour Party official, and Benedict Spencer, Conservative commentator, in just a few minutes. To get the reaction first, though, from a Reform UK supporter, big donor indeed, businessman Zia Youssef, who joins us right now. Good evening, well, I suppose good morning, early hours of the morning now to you, Zia.
Good morning, Julie.
Thank you very much for joining us. Well, look, you must be absolutely thrilled so far. We've got this exit poll that's predicting, well, one of the mega polls that we saw before the election may well be correct, that Reform UK could be winning 13 seats in this election. What's your reaction to that?
Well, look, my reaction is I think the British people want real change. They want real change in Westminster, the reality of which Labour will not be. The Conservative Party, true conservatism, is being reborn in the form of the Reform Party. The most important thing about today is that Nigel Farage, we're very confident that Nigel Farage will be a member of Parliament for the first time.
That's 8th-time trying, 99% likelihood that he will win Clacton is what the exit poll is saying.
Indeed, and I'm in Clacton now. The energy is amazing. So, look, I want to be really clear that this is just the beginning. We're very happy, but this is simply the beginning on a journey to elect Nigel Farage as the Prime Minister of this country.
Do you think that's going to happen? No, he said, look, he wasn't going to be having a manifesto for government this time round. He said that, that wasn't an option. Didn't like the word manifesto either. But I've been talking to senior figures in the Reform UK over the last couple of days. They're not predicting 13 MPs this time round. They think it's going to be rather less than that, perhaps even as low as 5, even 7. This is suggesting a much better turnout. What do you put that down to?
Well, look, I would caveat that this is an exit poll, and we are in the realm now. It looks like clearly Reform are the 3rd largest party by vote share. Whatever that number is, ends up being 17, 18, 19%. The reality is we are at an area of the vote share where the seat return for each incremental percentage point of votes is very, very significant. So I wouldn't want to prejudge it. I'd rather wait until the results come. But again, what I will say is regardless of the number of seats Reform get in this particular election, what is very, very clear is that Reform has gotten 17, 18% of the vote share with a shoestring budget. Remember, it was just a few weeks, short weeks ago, that Nigel Farage wasn't even standing. In October 2022, Reform was sitting at 4% in the polls, delivering now 17, 18, 19% of the vote share. I would tell people at home to appreciate just how quickly, the world. We live in a world where these numbers can move very, very quickly. Political parties can gain enormous amounts of support in a relatively short period of time. I point people to France, where Marine Le Pen, and just to be clear, Nigel Farage is no Marine Le Pen, but if you look at what happened with her results just 2 years ago, she was at 18%. She's now at 36%. I firmly believe, and we firmly believe, that this sort of momentum can be replicated here, and that's why we're very confident in this movement. And I encourage people to join us if you believe in true conservatism, not claiming you're conservative and then governing in an opposite way. That has been reborn this evening in the form of the Reform Party. I'd urge people to join us.
Well, we spoke to Alex Salmond, the former First Minister of Scotland, former leader of the SNP, and he was saying, with him, with the SNP, it took them 20 years to get to this position, if this is what you achieve. The role of Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, the leader, the chairman, have talked about is being, basically the opposition, providing opposition and destroying the Conservative Party. Conservatives are predicted in this exit poll to get 131 seats. Is that destroying the Conservative Party?
To be clear, the Conservative Party have done a great job of destroying themselves. Let's see where we end up in terms of the Conservative, the number of seats. The reality is very precious few, if any, of those Conservative MPs will be truly Conservative, regardless of what their business card may say. We're focused on our positive message. That is what people have voted for. Anyone who has seen the rally that we did in Birmingham,
which you spoke at, of course.
Yes, and the energy was absolutely incredible. This is a really, really positive message. We have a chance to return Great Britain to its greatness, and Reform are the party to be able to deliver that.
I've got to ask you about that. We had Paul Mason on earlier, obviously no fan of Reform UK, is on the left of the Labour Party even, but talking about, basically, I think he maybe even used the words that, Nigel Farage, racist things, basically, saying that sort of the 2.8 million Muslims in this country are sort of not integrating, not friends of this country. What do you make of the criticism of Nigel Farage, and indeed of a number of the candidates in this election who have said some, frankly, the candidates in this case, some pretty horrific things?
Well, first of all, Nigel Farage did not say that of all Muslims.
No, I pointed that out.
I categorically say that. Yeah, no, totally, and I appreciate that. Look, the reality is that we are in a position now where Reform, not just in polls, but it looks like Reform are actually going to deliver whatever it may be, 17, 18, 19% in an election. So I'd encourage people to really keep in mind, whenever a senior politician makes such aspersions about the entire Reform Party, they are casting such aspersions and slurring almost a fifth of the entire nation. And it's just remarkable to me how, as I said in my speech on Sunday, people whose salaries rely on their electorate, the electorate they are supposed to represent, think it's a sensible strategy or remotely appropriate to keep sneering at and insulting their own voters. The reality is that people who support reform because they believe in true conservatism, they believe in having secure borders, they believe in putting British people first, and they believe that Nigel Farage is the only politician actually willing to even talk about our biggest challenges, let alone have the solutions to solve them.
OK, really good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us there on the telephone there from Clacton, of course, where Nigel Farage is expected to win that seat. That's Zia Youssef, Reform UK donor and businessman. Let's come first to Richard Power-Said about this. We're in the sort of Hillary Clinton deplorables territory here, aren't we? They're sort of like, they're all racist. If you vote for Reform UK, and certainly the Tory party, some of the emails and the campaigns they've been putting out about Reform UK, into that sort of territory. The attacks we've had with the Channel 4 undercover a reporter, just happening quite by coincidence to be put with a man who happened quite by coincidence to be an actor who specialised in undercover acting jobs. Using an accent that wasn't his own, saying the most disgusting, foul things about the Prime Minister's ethnicity. Does telling an awful lot of voters that that basically, well, you must be bad people because you're voting for what we think is a bad person or a bad party, does that go down well, do you think?
I would strongly discourage it as an electoral strategy, yes. I don't think that is quite what most people in the Labour Party are doing. Maybe it's what some shouty people on Twitter are doing, but I think most people in the Labour Party recognise that the anger that we're seeing across the country from all different parts of the ideological spectrum is down to the fact that people's wages have stagnated for a decade and a half. Their living standards aren't improving. Like, people get really bloody angry, and they should be angry because it's not good enough. And the thing that I would say, you know, in relation to kind of Reform's electoral success is two big problems for them. One is, OK, over the last 2.5 decades, the, sorry, technical term, wonky term, the electoral valency of cultural conservative ideas.
Lord.
So, like, that how much it motivates people when they go to the ballot box, that has increased. Those cultural conservative ideas have become more persuasive for people at the ballot box. But the number of people who hold those views is it's going down. And that is a fundamental structural problem for any of these kinds of parties. Now, if Reform was to start being a kind of levelling up party, then I think they would be in a really strong electoral position. But instead, they've got Nigel Farage, I think, holding them back, because the moment that voters start to notice that he's a low tax for rich people, he's against...
Free marketeer.
He's a free marketeer.
You think that's not where the British public are, and that's in... Yes,
and it's particularly...
They're particularly where conservative, but economically are there. Benedict Spence, I mean, that is a fair point, isn't it? And also, of course, the first-past-the-post voting system. We've seen this incredible rise of the right in the European Union elections, but in the parliamentary elections, and looks like in the parliamentary elections in France. But, of course, first-past-the-post isn't their electoral system.
This is reassuring, because these have been some of my criticisms of Reform for some time, is that it doesn't actually understand the sort of people that it really needs to be appealing to, and it's almost sort of succeeding despite that. Nigel Farage has wanted this breakthrough for a very long time. He's got it, like Icarus. He's flying very close to the sun, and now he's going to enjoy all the scrutiny attention that comes with that. And it's not just going to be a very vindictive Conservative Party, which I know lots of people are saying, oh, there might be some sort of pact. The Conservative Party will never form a pact with Nigel Farage. They would rather fail and see him fail rather than form a pact. But also now the Labour Party, because this is the hunting ground, really, for Reform. If they want to succeed and survive long-term as a party, that's where they need to go back, which means they're going to get that back in return.
Let's come to Peter Caldwell, who is still with us as well, talk presenter and analysing all this. Now, just bearing in mind, Swindon South is about to declare. And in fact, Labour has gained Swindon South from the Conservatives. Oh, Richard's all excited now. He's very happy. That is basically you can tell by when they line up on the stage what's if you've actually been in these.
Well, they're told a little bit before. Actually, in 2019, I was in South Swindon when Robert Buckland tripled his majority, and now he has lost.
Former Justice Secretary Robert Buckland, I mean, a regular on the media rounds. He was defending a majority of 5,650, which ain't anything compared to the sort of. I mean, you see these by-election results.
And this is a bellwether seat. I mean, had Labour not won this, they would have been in serious trouble. Heidi Alexander, former MP, former Deputy Mayor of London. Now she's the MP for South Swindon. Yeah,
this is the sort of seat, basically, Labour should not just be winning, but winning comfortably. And if they don't win a seat like this, then they're going to be doing very badly. We're looking at 21,000 plus seats for Heidi Alexander for Labour on 48% of the vote. Robert Buckland on 12,000 for the Tories on 26%. Reform coming in third place, just over 6,000 votes. Again, you'd expect that sort of result. But I mean, that is very bad news that Robert Buckland is out of a job. But again, this will be a pointer to the idea, Peter, that this exit poll is very accurate. This result tells us a lot more than those first three, which would be predictable.
Yes, everything the exit poll has told us has been correct. Robert Buckland has gone very badly down there, dropped by nearly a quarter of the vote, which will be reflected in many other seats as well. He has lost his position as an MP. He'd previously been a cabinet member, both under Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. But yes, he's out now. He has a knighthood. But Heidi Alexander, it's interesting actually with people like Heidi Alexander, who has a lot of experience both as an MP and Deputy Mayor of London, and people like Douglas Alexander, who may well win in Scotland, because they will have a lot more experience than some of the people in the shadow cabinet at the moment. So interesting one for Keir Starmer to say, actually, do I give Heidi Alexander a ministerial job? Do I give someone like Douglas Alexander a ministerial job?
Yeah.
So that's a very interesting dilemma to have.
Well, let's come back to that, actually, with you, Richard, because again, that's the thing, handing out the jobs. Now, one would assume, normally, well, you know, if you're a shadow cabinet member for this or that, or shadow minister, you will take on that job. That may not be the case. There's certainly been a question mark about one particularly senior shadow cabinet minister, and that is David Lammy, the shadow foreign secretary, that actually doesn't do a very good job. He's said some rather unsavoury things about Donald Trump, who could well win the next US presidential election. That'd be rather awkward if the British Foreign Secretary has been, let's face it, slagging him off and calling him God knows what names under the sun on Twitter, and it's all out there. Do you think that most of these Labour shadow cabinet members feel they're safe in their jobs? I mean, other than Rachel Reeves, I think she's a sure thing. Angela Rayner guaranteed her job, of course, through the actual members' votes. But anyone else?
I would be really surprised if there were major changes from the shadow cabinet to the cabinet. Of course, there are fewer departments at the moment than there are shadow cabinet jobs. So probably, I think Starmer will probably wield the knife rather than creating whole new departments.
This is the issue, though. You instantly have enemies at that point.
Yeah. Well, he can
on the first day.
He can afford to, because you know, he's got that big majority. I would stress that actually there's a lot of experience in this shadow cabinet. You've got lots of people who had
They've all been lawyers. They've all been lawyers and special advisors. They've got loads of experience.
I mean, we've got a pretty fantastic thing in, you know, somebody who used to be an economist at the Bank of England, now running the Treasury. That sounds pretty good to me. But look, there is...
Because we've all got so much faith in the Bank of England's decision-making.
I'm the economist.
Yeah, good Lord.
Come on.
Wonderful. Happy days.
On this question
I'm beginning
about...
to feel sorry for Richard now.
I'm feeling pretty happy for me.
I think it's probably doing okay. You're not having too bad an evening.
This is one of the funny things, actually, because I had lots of people on Twitter saying, of course, you know, we have to be very, you know, politically neutral during the election. I mean, basically, I'm quite happy to criticise everybody, all the people who I think have been messing up. So I'm an equal opportunity criticiser. But it is really interesting. Some people were saying to me on Twitter, can't wait to watch you on telly. We're crying your tears over the election result. I have to say, I care not a jot, and not because I don't care about politics, I don't care about this country or the policies. I just genuinely, I just don't think for a moment that anyone could seriously claim the Conservatives deserved to win this. But I also don't feel any enthusiasm in it, because I don't think the Labour Party deserved to win it either.
Well, you could imagine that I disagree pretty strongly with that. Look, the Labour Party is going to, I think, offer exactly, is going to provide exactly what it's offered, which is stability, which is change. You might have heard those words a few times.
God, give him a slap, Benedict.
But no, but you know
I'm
what?
being filmed.
But actually, I think quite seriously, some of us in the Labour Party would like more egalitarian policies, would like a bit more redistribution. It's not going to happen, quite frankly.
Get those kids out of those private schools. Benedict Spencer was very strongly about this one as somebody who went to private school. No, Benedict, just some breaking news we got in. A Labour source is claiming that Jeremy Corbyn is set to win Islington North, which of course was his seat. A snigger already from him. Islington, of course, his seat as a Labour MP, of course, being ousted from the party by Keir Starmer, standing as an independent. It's thought, it's been claimed, he could win by as few as 1,500 votes, which is a very close run thing in a general election. What do you make of that? Because is that a little bit of a clue to the sort of challenge that a lot of candidates who are standing against Labour, particularly over the issue of Gaza, that the threat they could pose to a lot of these Labour MPs?
Well, I think it's very important that more people stay and work longer. I think we're going to have a very difficult conversation about upping the state pension age at some point. So Jeremy Corbyn staying in Parliament for as long as possible is leading the charge on that. So that's a very good thing. Obviously, this is something that we are going to see reflected across the country, is that uptick in vote for certain independents on this issue. I think, obviously, oh, for heaven's sake, is currently escaped me, but there are a number of a certain former Labour MP who won a by-election election very recently, and his name is Galloway.
Galloway, okay.
For heaven's sake.
How could anybody forget George Galloway?
Please, could we all forget George Galloway?
For a few blessed
nice,
minutes, I was the most charmed man in Britain. We may well see a few more seats there. It will be interesting to see how big that is.
That's going to be fascinating to watch. Well, we shall see. Look, obviously, we're waiting for more seats to declare. I'm still waiting for Basildon and Billericay in Essex. That, of course, is the seat of the Conservative Party chairman, Richard Holden. It could look, I mean, after he parachuted himself in as the only candidate option for the local party, it could be looking that he will be losing that seat on the basis of the exit poll. We'll bring you that result as soon as we get it. Any other results that come in, we'll get them to you first here at Talk. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Stay tuned. This is Julia Hartley-Brewer.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning to you. It is the early hours of the morning at 12:25 a.m. We are listening to Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Still with me in the studio. Everyone's munching sweets now. Stop munching sweets. I'm about to introduce you. Talk presenter Peter Cardwell, Labour Party official Richard Power-Said, and Conservative commentator Benedict Spence. Just to let you know, we are expecting a result from Washington and Gateshead. In fact, that result has just come out. I'm going to guess that here we are looking at a Labour hold, as we would be expecting this time of night. A lot of these results that come out are in basically staunch Labour seats that you would expect to continue with Labour. Let's turn our attention now, though, to the Green Party. Delighted to be welcomed by former Green Party leader Baroness Natalie Bennett to the show. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia. Not our usual time for discussion.
Not our usual time, no. I think we're about 12 hours out, aren't we? Natalie, if I may call you that, we've got the predictions from the exit poll of the Green Party doubling their seats from 1 in Brighton to 2. Expected, obviously, Bristol Central. That could actually be the most extraordinary scenario of the night, of Labour getting a majority of 170, and then one of their frontbenchers, Thangham Debonair, being out on her ear from the voters in Bristol. Tell us your reaction to the exit poll.
Well, I think, first of all, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that actually what this is overwhelmingly, if the exit poll is right, which all the indications are as it is, that overall it's a great rejection of 14 years of Tory chaos, 14 years of Tory austerity, 14 years of Tories failing to act on the climate and nature crises. But certainly, yes, for the Greens, if the poll is right, and I think the indications are that it will be, Bristol Central is tremendously exciting, and Carla Denyer, the Green co-leader, will be a great representative, really absolutely right fit for Bristol Central, and that will really, doubling, and we still have hopes for more later in the evening, but doubling is a great sign of progress for the Green Party.
Yeah, doubling from a very low number, of course. I mean, Caroline Lucas sitting for many years as the only Green MP. Does it put you out a bit that these upstarts at Reform UK, they've only just started, the first time they actually run in an election, they're being predicted, although they seem to be thinking they're going to win less, 13 seats. You guys have been around for years and years and years, battling it out, and best case scenario, you can only imagine manage 2?
Well, I think at the moment we're talking about the exit poll, and we know that in Waveney Valley and North Herefordshire, where there simply hasn't been the sampling, we don't know what's going to happen in those seats. And I'm confident we're going to see an extremely strong showing and quite possibly a win. But time will tell. What we're seeing around the country, and I'm sure there's going to be a large number of very strong second placings. You look at what's happened with our local councillors over the past 5 years. The number of local councillors has increased 5-fold. That's an exponential graph of growth. We're looking to start on the same path in terms of Westminster.
OK. And you'd mentioned at the beginning there about, the chaos of 14 years of Tory rule and failure to tackle climate change issue. I mean, a lot of voters turning to Reform, of course, because they want to get rid of net zero. They're the only party, I think, that is actually opposed to net zero. I think maybe the SDP as well. I don't think they're predicted to get any seats, though. But, I mean, what would be different under Labour, given that, voters it would appear, according to this exit poll, elected with a very strong majority a Labour government? Because as far as I can tell, all the talk of GB energy and all of that, only thing different between Labour and the Conservatives on net zero is that Labour are going to do things 5 years sooner.
Well, I think there is a grave concern that Labour extremely watered down its original proposals, the $28 billion investment that just disappeared and slid away to practically nothing. And those are the kind of investments that could give people actually warm, comfortable, affordable to heat homes, that could tackle both the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis. So I think there is a real problem here that Labour is being elected on a very weak mandate. They haven't really stood up for what needs to be done in our society, the kind of investment that we need, the kind of taxes that we need from those with the broadest shoulders.
It's always about tax, isn't it? It's always about tax.
Well, that's about investment in the NHS, which actually surveys show overwhelmingly people want to see that investment in our NHS.
Everyone wants
like in Waveney Valley.
Everyone's very, very keen on lots of extra spending. They just want someone else to be taxed to afford it.
Well, people want to be able to see a local dentist. We have a huge rise in DIY dentistry because people are simply unable to get to see a dentist. Surely that's something that we as a society should be able to provide.
I would have thought that given the net zero policies that you want to pursue, I mean, we'd be going back to pre-industrial age, that everyone would be having to pull their own teeth under the regime a Green Party government would lead us to.
Well, of course, what we would see if we want to cut people's energy bills, what we need is onshore wind and solar, the kind of investment that we haven't seen.
Not what we need.
That's the cheapest source of energy, Julia. That is the reality.
It's not. It's subsidised and it's unreliable.
Relying on fossil fuels and gas, that's relying on energy prices which are volatile, as we've all seen very clearly over the past couple of years.
Less volatile for the countries that are actually producing the oil and the gas, fracking and producing the oil out of North Sea oil. I mean, America's doing all right on that front. Just finally, okay, you reckon you might do better than the 2 seats that you're predicted to win in the exit poll?
Yes, I mean, we will know in 4 or 5 hours, so there's kind of, we can speculate at this point. But,
hey, that's the whole job right now, Natalie.
but it's when you look at the exit poll, it looked at 133 seats. None of them were Tory Green marginals, which is what's the case of the 2 we're particularly focused on.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate that. Baroness Natalie Bennett, former Green Party leader. Come to you, Benedict Spencer, because it seems to me you don't need to vote Green if you want to go for any of these policies, because all of the major parties have fully signed up to this stuff.
I mean, it is one of the the problems of being a sort of a single issue party, and frankly taking a pretty extreme view of that single issue, is if you decide to go off at that tangent, you are going to massively hamstring yourself. If, as you say, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party go, oh well, we'll take some of those ideas because these ones play well and these ones sound nice.
Everything plays well. Everyone cares about this issue until you ask them to pay for it, and then they say, I don't bloody think so.
I mean, this is the thing, and Natalie Bennett's talking about some of the these two other seats. One of which is the Waveney Valley, which is where I'm from, and I just sort of think, well, it's that sort of politics of vibes very much. It's sort of the sense that actually we want it to be offshore because it's very close to several nuclear power stations, and there's a certain degree of, I think, actually self-indulgence in that part of the world, and that, I think, is a very common theme amongst many of these Green target seats, self-indulgence of middle-class people.
I just still can't get over you saying the word vibes. I just didn't see Benedict as a vibes kind of person.
I'm not.
I get those vibes from Benedict.
I don't get those vibes from my day. That's Peter Cobb, I'll come to you about this. I mean, look, the Greens are not going to be storming into power. No. But again, it's a fair question. You're a bit peeved. Reform UK suddenly, the new upstarts, they're the new popular kids in town. What do you make of overall, looking at the results we've got so far? OK, we see Labour hold, Labour hold, Labour hold, Labour hold. Reform UK and a lot of these seats coming a close, well, not a close second, some of them, but, a good solid second. But absolutely trouncing the Conservatives in these. Can we read anything into that, combined with the exit poll, about the future of Reform UK?
Yes, I think we can. It is undeniably a major electoral force in this country. Keir Starmer cannot totally ignore what those MPs, whether there are 7 of them, whether 13 of them, are going to say, and they will prove to be Nigel Farage MP, as he will almost undoubtedly be in the next few hours. Well, that is something that is going to give him a legitimacy that he hasn't had previously. It's interesting with the Green Party as well, because they did very well in the local election results recently in England. In fact, I think that was kind of underreported how well they did, and the fact that they've only got 2 MPs, they will say, oh, they want PR and they want to change the voting system and so on, but actually to only have 2 MPs is not exactly brilliant for them.
No, indeed. I mean, let's come back to you, Richard, as a former Labour Party official. I mean, the Greens say, it's going to be ending the chaos in the lines that Labour have used. But in terms of the Green stuff, my argument has always been with the Conservatives, Labour, anyone who's likely to be in power, which is that you can either have growth or you can have net zero. You can't do both. It's an either or. Which in the end will, I love the look on your face for this, that's the statement of fact, which in the end will Keir Starmer choose?
Well, you know what? All of the most kind of red and tooth and claw capitalists in the world are disagreeing with you, and they think that the clean energy revolution is going to be the big geopolitical rivalry between East and West, and we've got to make sure that we're fighting it and
the East is going to win it.
You talked about subsidies earlier, subsidies for renewables. Fossil fuels have received far more subsidies than renewables, both in the long term and in the short term. That is despite the fact that, of course, fossil fuels are a highly established sector, whereas renewables have basically been a start-up until very recently. And fossil fuels are going to need more and more subsidies in future as it becomes more expensive to extract them, whereas renewables are just getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper.
More. It's not more expensive if we were fracking. I have to say, genuinely,
Let's talk about fracking. Fracking has only become cheap in the US because they've been subsidising it for 4 decades.
But their economy is not trashed by what's happened with Ukraine and energy prices because they are a net exporter. Look, we're going to have to move on. We're still waiting to find the result from Basildon and Billericay. I wonder if it's just very close in Essex. That could be the first big drama of the night, with Richard Holden, the Conservative Party chair, possibly losing his seat. Also expecting around now Broxbourne in Hertfordshire, which has been continuously held by the Conservatives since it was created in 1983. Majority of them 19,000 last time round. Now this will give an indication, if that is held by the Tories, that they're able to hold on to some of their home county seats. If they lose that, then my God, we are looking at a Tory bloodbath, no question at all. So we'll keep an eye out for those seats. It's 12:36. Do stay tuned. Back in just a few more moments with more from our panel. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed a general election all-nighter here at Talk, the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Time is 12:39. If you're just tuning in, I don't know, you've been having a great night out. You might have missed the exit poll. Came in at 10 o'clock. The moment the exit poll came out, the moment the polls closed, 170 majority for Labour is what is being predicted by that exit poll. 410 Labour MPs, 131 Conservative MPs, Lib Dems on 61, Reform on 13, far more than they've been predicted. SNP very unhappy on 10. I think the Lib Dems, Greens are happy, going from 1 to 2 is the prediction for them. Some very happy, some very unhappy people. A lot of people in the Tory party looking like they're going to be losing their seats overnight. We're still waiting for Basildon and Billericay in Essex. Was expected to be announced already, and that could be the first drama of the night. The chairman of the Conservative Party, Richard Holden, standing in that seat, having imposed himself basically as the only candidate choice. Wait to see whether he can hold on to that seat. Not probably looking likely, given the numbers we're on. But still joining me in the studio, Richard Power-Said. He's a former Labour official and Conservative commentator, Benedict Spencer, also talk presenter, and we're saying our politics wonk. I call him other things off air. Peter Campbell.
Different vowels
and the word wonk.
Yeah. I mean, let's just be mature. It's that time of night. We've had a lot of Haribo at this point.
Post-watershed.
Yes, post-watershed. We're pre-watershed again now, aren't we? You've been hearing word out of the Rishi Sunak's...
yeah, very close aid to Rishi Sunak got in touch with me to say, in their words, it's a bloody tough night for us.
Did they use that language, or was it worse than that?
No, that's exactly the language that person used. I'm unsurprised at that, but it's at least an admission.
Is the bloody tough night aspect of it the fact that that realistically, if you're going to lose as Tory leader of the Tory party, you don't necessarily want to carry on being an MP, although it would be the first time a sitting Prime Minister has lost his seat?
Yeah, well, it certainly looks as if Rishi Sunak will win his seat in Richmond and Northallerton, but we'll see.
OK, right. But I think we are getting a result in Newcastle Central right now. I have to say, this part of the world, they are knocking it out. There's those results coming in thick and fast, and we are seeing yet another Labour hold there, no doubt at all. Easy Labour hold, and by a very long way as well, it does appear. With a second place, it does appear once again Reform, but quite a long way back. So I think say 18,000 there for 18,875 for Labour. 7,815 for Reform, just 4,228 for Conservatives. We are just seeing this story again and again, Peter.
Conservatives down 16.3 percentage points, Reform up 10.7 percentage points. No surprise there, Chian Wara, who has been the MP for Newcastle upon Town Central since 2010. She's a shadow science minister. She's been around the shadow front bench or the shadow ministerial positions quite a lot. I would imagine she'll be a minister in Keir Starmer's government. But yes, Labour down a bit, certainly, but still a very strong performance from her.
One of the things we're definitely seeing is that turnout is down. Now, turnout was down in 2019 to 67.3%. That was down from 2017 to 2019. And again, I find it extraordinary. You would have thought 2019 was such a big, get Brexit done. Jeremy Corbyn was such a divisive figure, you'd think. But that did not result in that. But we're looking at the vote going down again this time round.
Well, here's the interesting point. When all the votes for Labour are totalled, in 2017, when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, he got more actual votes than a Labour Party had ever got previously. We could be in a position in about whenever all the votes are counted in 12, 14 hours time, whenever that is.
It's a long night, folks.
Where there are fewer people this time round that voted for Labour in 2017, yet Labour has a massive majority rather than losing just about to Theresa May.
But again, I mean, let's come back to Richard Power-Said on this. This is a stat I bore my poor audience with again and again. This big sort of wave of support for Tony Blair in '97, and it was such a popular figure for so many people who voted for him. I mean, such enthusiasm about after so many years of Tory rule, and yet he got fewer votes than John Major got in 1992. I
think that you can overdo the kind of everyone was incredibly enthusiastic in 1997 story. I ended up writing a book about this, so unfortunately it's my pet topic.
I'm going to tell you, no, I'm going to be nice. He's the author of 1997, The Future That Never Happened, A History of New Labour.
Fantastic birthday present, ideal for Christmas presents, bar mitzvahs, still available in the bookshops. It's on the second run. Look, the...
plug of the night.
I can do more of them.
Honestly, these people who plug their books, I mean, as the author of The Secret Advisors, I mean, I just think this is awful, you know.
And it's an excellent book.
Oh, for God's sake.
Just say something.
So the point is that in 97, actually, all of the criticisms that you hear about Keir Starmer now, exactly the kinds of things that were being said about Tony Blair before the 97 election. I think the thing is we kind of remember it for those very carefully choreographed images of people waving
I was a political journalist
flags.
then. There was a very different feel in terms of what the focus is. The enthusiasm for Tony Blair was among Labour supporters was completely different from the sort of, well, I guess he'll do that for Keir Starmer. Benedict Spence, got a book to pub now.
My first job was in a Printworks making book.
Oh,
you might be interested.
Sorry. And are you the son of a toolmaker?
I was going to say I stood on the balcony observing the factory floor. What were you actually going to ask?
I don't know anymore. I don't know. I think we've lost it. No, but in terms of enthusiasm for Keir Starmer, this is one of the things. Look, you get there's a lot of talking. It started in America. This your first 100 days. You've got to achieve things. Well, you've got that wave of support. You've got that power. And you basically get all the big stuff done as soon as possible. And there's stuff that he's talked about doing in the early months. And we know he's got Sue Gray. She is his chief of staff. Wow, she knows how things work. She's been at the top of the civil service for many years, secretly planning to go to Labour while she was investigating Boris Johnson over Partygate. So extra marks there. And there's going to be a lot of scrutiny of her work, isn't there? But it's all very well. He's likely to have all of his MPs, 410 MPs. He's got this plan. But will he be able to actually achieve anything to maintain the minuscule levels of enthusiasm there already is?
Well, it depends, I think, on the makeup of the party, what their majorities are like, actually what kind of Labour MPs they are, because, of course, this is not, in fact, the size majority that he could have had, and that, obviously, the larger it is, the easier it makes it for him. But, ultimately, it's going to depend, is it going to be the sort of thing that looks quite nice, window dressing, or is it going to be the difficult stuff? Is it going to be, for instance, planning reform? Well, that's the thing that the country really needs. Is that going to happen in 100 days? Almost certainly not. So
they say it will.
They say it will. They say, and it depends.
Angela Rayner is the new housing secretary.
It depends entirely on the makeup of the party, of the MPs, and what their majorities look like. Otherwise, they're going to run into the same problems that the Tories.
Okay, I feel we're going to be talking about this for a very long time, but not necessarily tonight. We do need to go to a break. Up next, we're going to be talking to John Sweeney, who's a Liberal Democrat candidate, see what he expects happening for him tonight. And of course, coming up at 1 o'clock in the morning, will be Mike Graham taking over in the hot seat. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Yeah, it is the election all-nighter. Well, let's turn our attention to John Sweeney now. He's on the line. He's a Liberal Democrat candidate for Sutton Coldfield and, of course, a long-time journalist, and joins us. Good, early hours of the morning to you, John.
And good early hours of the morning to you, Julia. How are you?
Very well indeed. Will you be taking your beanie hat off if you get elected?
No.
Fair enough. What do you reckon are your chances? Look, the Liberal Democrats only won 12 seats back in 2019. Absolutely devastating for them. 61 seats is what they predicted by the exit poll this time round. Are you likely to be one of the beneficiaries of that?
No. I'm delighted, and we've done extremely well. But at the moment, to be fair, Sutton Coldfield, there's no Liberal Democrats councillors at all. And it looks as though Andrew Mitchell, Deputy Foreign Secretary, he's clinging on by his fingernails. We're looking at the numbers that we can see so far. We're crunching them, and we think he may lose.
Okay.
Or if he stays, it's by a very small number. Labour comes second or first. Reform has done very well. I'm not happy about that, but
a lot of people don't seem to be happy about that, about Reform doing well. No, let me go back to more big picture stuff of people listening from around the country. Lib Dems absolutely trounced in 2015, making their way sort of back up again. What do you put that down to? Is it the leadership of Ed Davey? Is it the sight of him in a wetsuit falling off a paddleboard? Was that the big decider, or was it policy, or was it just people hating the Tories?
So there's a whole. Listen. I'm a war reporter, and I went to Bakhmut 7 times in 2022, but I wouldn't do a bungee jump.
No, neither would I.
Yeah, Julia, I mean, by the way, everybody who's listening ought to know that Julia and I first met.
We know each other, yeah.
But not like that.
No, that sounded wrong, didn't it? The Tatton election in 97.
Anyway, and when we both reported on Martin Bell's great victory against Neil Hamilton, and my nickname for you was Julia.
You can't say the words. You cannot say the. Oh, good Lord! Whatever out of the morning. Whatever out of the morning. In a friendly way. I'm just going to ask you one final question. Lib Dems, there was a hope from some of the mega polls. There was some hope that the Liberal Democrats could be the official opposition. You know, we were in sort of, go back to your constituencies, prepare for power. Didn't really happen. Back on the way up at 61, but what role does this give the Lib Dems when Labour's got such a big majority?
We will remain the party of Remain and rejoin the European Union.
Good luck with that.
More or less, more than anyone else, with a party of decency, and also, thanks to Ed, we brought a real sense of fun back to British politics. I fear that Keir Starmer, and congratulations and well done. We live in a democracy. Fair play to Labour. But there's a certain joylessness about.
Oh, well, no, with that I would definitely agree. Although I don't want to see Keir Starmer in a wetsuit falling off a paddleboard either. We're going to have to leave it there. John Sweeney, I'm so sorry, Lib Dem candidate there. Apologies for the choice language. It was an affectionate. I'd like to point out, though, although you two were talking about writing books, I was in his book for the Battle of Knutsford Heath. But yeah, that was a very fun election, 97, following Neil Hamilton and Martin Bell. Now, let's go back to big picture. We've got the last few moments of the show. We're still waiting for some more results. I mean, I say still waiting for Basildon and Billericay, still waiting for Broxburn in Hertfordshire. Benedict Spence, in terms of, tonight, what we've learned, let's assume the exit poll is correct. They have been in the last few elections within a few seats, and we get this is a sort of picture. What do we expect from the next, not just 100 days, as we're discussing earlier, the next 5 years?
I think for the Labour Party, it is going to be difficult. This isn't me sort of trying to cope on the perspective of the Conservative Party. The structural issues that the Labour Party faces, even with this majority, are very sizable. It will be a very difficult first 2 years, and if they're unable to sort of get over those hurdles, I think the public will not be very sympathetic, given that what they have promised is stability, a sort of a sense of competent managerialism that the Conservatives haven't been able to give them. In terms of what we're going to see from the Conservatives, well, that's entirely up to them. Do they want to continue the infighting? Do they want to continue deciding, well, we're very to the centre one day and we're very talking far to the right the other? Or actually, are they going to decide, yes, we are a party that can potentially be in government? These numbers, 130, Peter Mandelson talked about an asteroid hitting. Well, this is not an extinction-level event. There are some dinosaurs left. There is an opportunity there for them to rebuild. There is enough sort of exposure for Nigel Farage to push them in a certain direction, but also to become exposed himself. So it is not, I think, the necessarily the seismic change on the right. There is still the possibility for the Conservatives to survive. It is entirely up to them and how they interpret what it is that Labour does over the next 5 years.
You've focused a lot there on the Conservatives. Let's come to you, Richard Said, a former Labour official. The thing is, look, there is no money left. It's very different from 97 when Blair came in. Very, very difficult in tray for whoever is in power. And I can imagine Rishi Sunak, frankly, and the word is he's going to resign tomorrow morning. Well, yeah, tell us something we don't know. But I could imagine someone actually heaving a sigh of relief at this point, saying, "Oh, thank God I don't have to deal with all, Ukraine and energy issues and all of the other issues that are coming up with the NHS and the cost of living was still not resolved." What is the picture for the next 5 years? Because voters, it seems, are basically got quite high expectations that change will make things better for them.
I think that as long as Labour can get the tax receipts up from the growth, so that they so that the NHS can just about get out of the doldrums, so that we can get rid of our court backlog, so that there are enough police on the streets. Those are the kinds of things that are going to be that Keir Starmer is going to be judged on.
All of that costs a lot of money, don't it? That's the key thing. And again, those promises we've got so far of change, of minischool, 1 extra teacher every 3 schools, 40,000 extra operations in the NHS or appointments. There are 1 million plus a day, for goodness sake. Great if you're one of the 40,000. Doesn't make much of a difference. Crime's still going up. Still the same number of prison places right now and for the next few years. Early release scheme continuing. Stopping the boats. Barely touched on immigration tonight. Peter Cardwell, come to you. That's going to be a big issue. It's been a real sort of massive issue for Conservatives, top 3 issue for Conservative voters. Not so much for Labour voters. But I have a funny feeling when the boats don't stop and we have nice weather over the rest of the month and August and the boats keep on coming at great speed, this is going to become a massive, massive headache.
Well, I interviewed Keir Starmer about this about a week and a half ago, and I said, where is the deterrent in your plan? And he said that smashing the gangs was the deterrent. I think a lot of people will have trouble with that. Everything Labour wants to do costs a lot of money. The gamble is growth. In 5 years' time, and way before then, people will be saying, where's the progress? And have you done it without putting up the burden of taxation? I think it's impossible to do what Keir Starmer wants to do without putting up the burden of taxation. We'll see what he does and how quickly he does it. And in the budget that Rachel Reeves will have in October, November time, we will see very quickly where the axe will fall or where taxes...
And we're certainly going to expect, certainly the Institute of Fiscal Studies said, look, neither the Tories or the Labour Party were being remotely accurate about, how much money is needed just from an ageing population.
That's right.
Let's talk about what happens with the Conservatives. We've just got a couple of minutes left before we hand over to the news and then Mike Graham. Come back to you again, Benedict Spence. Tories, what happens now? We know Rishi Sunak is going to resign. We know there's going to be a leadership contest sooner rather than later. Depending on which big beasts are left, who do you think is going to run? Who's going to be the final 2 candidates going to go to the party membership, and who's going to win?
Well, you've heard them both mentioned in this studio tonight. I think it's going to be Priti Patel and I think it's going to be Tom Tugendhat. Those would be the 2 that I would think
candidate
would be
on the right, candidate really on the sort of one nation left. You don't think so?
I think so.
Let's come to you, Richard Said. Although you're not, this isn't your party, I know you're a close watcher.
I think that a really interesting historical lesson is David Cameron, right? In 2005 to 2007, even to 2008, OK, you knew that David Cameron was, quotes, the moderniser, but you had no idea that he was going to be defined both in the 2010 election and as Prime Minister by his response to Gordon Brown's response to the financial crisis. This was a big geopolitical event, and then the Prime Minister, the Labour Prime Minister, responded to it, and then David Cameron was defined by his response to that. Right. I think that the next Conservative leader is going to be defined by their response to Keir Starmer's response to things that we can't even predict now.
I've lost track.
I'm sorry, it was convoluted.
My point is... Victoria Atkins is what you're saying.